first of all, thank you for taking this time and this opportunity to come and speak with this group.
Yeah, thank you.
We definitely are aware of the work, and we do appreciate the approach. And there's many here that also have a pretty strong palate for etymology. We've also invited some of our university members, and so they're also here. And just to set the pace for the conversation today, everyone, we're going to have a Q&A after Pierre's initial presentation. From there, we're going to go into those questions. But if you do have a question, you're going to have to leave it in the chat, and then we'll get to it. I'll actually pick it up on my side, and then we'll funnel it back around to Pierre.
Yep.
Also, for those that are not aware, Pierre may have just jumped into this. Pierre is an author. He's an illustrator. And of course, he's even a director. He's got his own documentary. He's always working on something over there. He's obviously a professional linguist and many other things that he'll explain to you here in just a moment, because he holds many titles. I became first interested in his work after reviewing some of David Icke's illustrations. When I saw the illustrations, I said, man, he must know something. And I just felt like something was not matching with the information that was being given versus what the illustrations were showing. So I looked, and I found that the illustrator was actually Pierre. And that actually set the pace for me to find his work. And when doing that, I came across a very massive repository of cosmic knowledge that really blended in with what I was discovering within the English language, and just undertones of there being a story that's being told. But he blew that into a whole nother level by basically revealing within not only the Arab dialect, but or we'll have better terms here in a minute, but in the Arabic language, also in many languages such as the Hebrew, that there is an underlining story that is discussing a lot, and mainly the involvement of some predecessors, I'll just say it that way, possibly some hyperdimensional entities, et cetera, that have been working on this planet in secret for quite a bit of time, and that many of the linguistic systems are actually a part of their development. And so I'll just leave it at that. That way we can get started. I got to shake off the initial,
right.
You know, that happens, you know.
Thank you very much.
Often than not, but I always find that it occurs when there's about to be something explosive that's going to happen. So thank you again, Peter, for coming in, and you can actually take it from here.
Well, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. Yes, basically I'm the author of Holographic Culture. There's Holographic Culture. And my first book was The Murder of Reality, which looked at the Serpentagena, or the serpent race. They're also known as the Anguagena, or the Seraphim, or the Jinn. These are all different terminologies which go back to the angelic tradition. And I think that this is really what is very important in terms of my research, because I've proved conclusively that the angel is synonymous with the sailor. So really, I'm studying the angelic sailor. And I think it's really important to go into some etymology so that we can actually deconstruct what we mean by an angelic sailor. Example, within the Semitic, in the Hebrew and in the Arabic, we have malak, which is an angel. But it's a polymorphic word, because malak also means malak, which is a sailor. And this is very important, particularly when we're looking at non-human angels. And when we're looking at the occult tradition in particular, we're seeing that there are two distinct types of human and non-human. And this is where we really find the partition within the occult between a humanist tradition, or human knowledge, and then non-human knowledge. And this partition within the occult tradition can be understood in terms of the Pythagorean tradition within the Greek classical system. So Pythagoras is Pythagoras, which would be the speaker of the serpent, which in this respect would be the seraphim, or these non-human angels. And then we have the Euclidean tradition. Now, Euclid was famous for writing the elements of geometry, but Euclid is coming from the Arabic root. So although ostensibly Euclides means good glory within the Greek, the terminology Euclid comes from Euclid, which is to copy or to ape. In this respect, mathematics copies or apes the external world. But in this respect, the root of the word goes back to Kurd, which is an ape, which is this humanist tradition. So we're seeing this split within the angelic tradition between this human and non-human. And this is the basis of the occult tradition, which can be represented as the three pillars of Freemasonry. And it's very interesting because when we go back into the seraphic tradition, and the seraphim in particular, which are the non-human angels, we see that there's a relationship between seraph, which is a serpent, and we have sapan, which is a sailor, related in the Arabic to safina, which is a ship. When we're going back into the ancient etymologies, we're seeing that the human, the lineage of the king or the ruler is again going back to this angelic tradition. So for example, when we look at, let's say, for example, Malak an angel and Malak a sailor, we see that there's a correlation with Melek, which is a king. Again, we would see the relationship in the Arabic as well. Sarif is a noble, is related to Seraph, which is a serpent, and Safina, which is a ship. In English, we would say that the connection is kingship. Kingship relates to this angelic tradition. Now, this angelic tradition is seen as being different or strange or alien. And this is very important when we're beginning to actually look and deconstruct the angels, because as I said before, that there are actually two different types of angels, non-human angels and then human angels. So for example, let's say when we look at the human angels, we see that there's a relationship with cherub, human type or proto-human angel. Again, the cherubim are represented with the sword, cherub, which is a sword, but again that they are related in the Semitic with carib, which is a boat. So we're seeing that again, that this is going back into what I describe as the scatological tradition. Logical tradition is at the basis of the classified tradition or the classical tradition, which appertains to this angelic tradition, which is secret. It's this restricted tradition. So the etymology of scaf, which is a small ship, the knowledge or study of ships, in this respect is the study of angelic boats or vessels, which relates to this angelic lineage. As I mentioned before, this angelic lineage is identified with this royal or noble lineage, which is described as lordship. So, for example, also when we look at the Greek, we see the etymology of archon, which is related to an archangel, but the archon means a ruler or an angel. And again, it's going back in the Greek to olkas, which is a large vessel. Olkas, a large vessel, informs a carrier vessel, informs the Latin root arc. But remember that the arc is circular. So these are circular or round vessels. And this is very important because when we actually look at the scatological tradition, we're looking at these angelic vessels circular or round. So for example, within the Semitic traditions in particular, and this is picked up in books such as Enoch and Ezekiel, we have what is described as the Ophanim wheels. Now the Ophanim wheels are described as such because these are interlinking wheels, and this is because these vessels are constructed from a series of interlinking. So the Ophanim are these angelic carriers. Now they are represented variously within the Semitic traditions as a type of vessel, as a type of barrel. So these are all signifiers which feed into the Ophanim. And again, the Ophanim wheel can sometimes be combined with a throne. So you would have what is represented as a throne chariot. Now, the throne chariot is another denomination of the Ophanim wheels. So this goes all the way back into what I describe as the saucer cults. Now, the saucer cults, they worshipped the Ophanim wheels. And this is very important because when we go back into religion, if you look at the etymology of religion, you see that there's a correlation with religare, which is to bind or to moor a vessel. And again, in English, we would say worship, ship as in a vessel. It's the same in the Arabic, and this is very important because these symbols carry over into many different languages. So this type of symbolism is known as polyglottal symbolism. For example, Sabar is to glorify, but in the Arabic is appertaining to Sabaoth, which is the angelic host. In English, we would say worship. And again, the church is the diagram of the boat or the vessel. So the nave is diagrammatic of navis in the Latin. So the symbolism again is going back into boat symbolism. Again, Naus, which is a temple, is related to Norse. A temple sanctuary is related to Norse, which is a ship or a vessel. So these type of word plays are playing out in many different languages. Again, even if we want to go back into, let's say, into the Far East, in the Eastern traditions, you have what is known as the Utsu no Fune. Now, the Utsu no Fune in Japanese means a hollow boat or a hollow vessel, but it's a polymorphic word. It also means a hollow tree. So one way in which the Japanese represent these hollow vessels as hollow trees. So if you go, for example, to Shinto shrines within Japan, they are surrounded by these hollow trees, but the signifier of the hollow tree is a signifier of the hollow vessel. And again, the Japanese nobility are related to these angelic vessels. And so this, again, is found encoded throughout language. And this is really going back into the traditions of the seraphim, which in the Arabic are translated. Now, it's actually very interesting because when we look at, for example, within the biblical tradition, and we look at, say, for example, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the host, we see that there is this etymological connection between Sabaoth, where we get the breakdown of Saba, which is an army. Now, Saba and army, which is a seraph. And so Yahweh Sabaoth can be understood to be the Lord of the seraphic host. So this is a non-human or alien type of entity. And again, this is very important because when we view angels, we see them as being separate from aliens, and this idea of aliens and angels have been separated. But in the ancient languages, the angels were often described as being strange. And so, for example, we see that there is this correlation between, for example, Zar, which is an angel, but it's a polymorphic word. Zar also means an alien. The two terms are interchangeable, they are synonymous. So an angel can be construed to be a visitor, a stranger, or an alien. And now Zar, an alien, is related, an angel or an alien is related to Sira, which is a boat. So again, they're identified with vessels. The same is polyglottal also within the Latin. So alienus and alien is related to out or a vessel. Now, what's very interesting about the etymology of Zar, which is an angel or an alien, is that the terminology is closely, once again, is closely related to the monarchical lineage of Sar, which is a type of prince, Sira, which is a boat. So we would say lordship in English, but the connotation is of vessels. And one way in which they would represent this angelic bloodline or lordship would be through a shield. So for example, in the Greek, you have oplon, which is a shield, which is related to pleon, which is a boat or a vessel. Now, the shield is another signifier used to denote these opening wheels, so these circular vessels. And again, within the Hellenistic traditions, the shield was used as a type of projectile. So they would put large shields within catapults, they would put in hot sand, and they would fling them at the enemy like these giant frisbees, which were a type of missile. And so this is very important because the missile is connected to a shield. Now, the etymology of missile is related to missionary. And so this is a very important connection because a missile is related to a missionary of God. And again, this is connoting an emissary from a boat. So the boat or a vessel is symbolized with a circular shield, which in this is an angelic carrier. But again, sorry, I might just...
Well, I finally got my system back up here, and also just my main system, because that's where I wanted to be at least doing the call today, so that way I can, you know, also kind of somewhat mediate between the terminology, you know, for especially for those that are just getting into understanding what this is about. I think it would also be a good place to actually insert a couple questions, because I think something very important is happening in history right now, where we see that we're getting geared up for another one of these proxy wars that are taking place over in Saudi Arabia. And I think there was a reference even by Donald Trump that mentioned whatever the kingdom tells us and meaning in a certain sense saying that even the Saudi Arabian kingdom has some type of even ownership over the United States. And so what I would like you to speak to, you know, if you may, is you mentioned that the Sunni and the Shia are in themselves like a break off of this a higher language, if you may, and a lower language, or those who are able to communicate with this higher alien being, and those that are kind of custodians of the earth plane. Can you give us some elaboration to why there seems to be such a schism in these factions, as far as that they're actually warring against each other?
Okay, right. Yeah. Right. First of all, we'll deal with Saudi Arabia. For example, Saudi Arabia is related to the Saudi priesthood, which is the priesthood of Moses. Now, the Saudi are identified with the etymology of Sod, which is a secret, and Sauda, which is black, with Shedim, and the worship of El Shaddai, which is the ancient word for God, but the terminology El Shaddai is related to Shed, which is a jinn, goblin, ghost, or ghoul. So that in itself is very interesting, and again, that would go into the etymologies of Yahweh, Eya Asher, which is I am what I am, but Eya Asher Eya is related to the tense Eya, which is the verb I am, but is also related to Aya, which is a serpent, and Ayal, which is a goblin. So again, this is going back into the traditions of the hidden priesthood, the black or secret priesthood, which can be represented as the Western priesthood. So the setting sun can be represented as the West. So Occidental is related in the Latin is related to death. And again, we're finding the symbolism within the rabbinical priesthood as well. Rabbi means Western or West. So the rabbinical priesthood is the Western priesthood, which is identified with the setting sun and is identified with death. But again, so with Rabbi and Arab as well. So again, the Arabian traditions and the rabbinical traditions are very much interconnected. Now,
and let me ask you this: what is the timeline from your research as far as the entry of this particular group into this planetary system, as far as with humanoids? Do you find that the humanoids are a byproduct of this genus, or that this is an interloping species and the humans were already here, and this was, as sometimes you state, an invader? And how does that differ from many of the ancient serpent cultures that we find here, that also seem to be having some kind of feminine component?
Yeah, this is a massively complex and a very difficult question. I think that there was a species of humanoid here, and I think that they're closely connected to the Aborigines. But in terms of the secret society network, in terms of in terms of humans, most Homo sapiens have been planted here by this the others, the Elohim. You would describe them as being identified with Sirius. So they are planters of worlds, and this connected with what's known in the ancient traditions as panspermia. It's alluded to within the Quran as the second creation. And again, we are in the process of the second creation as well. So this idea that the second creation will be completed. Again, this is certainly found within Greek philosophy in terms of, so you have this, the seraphim component, which is the thesis. The antithesis is the cherubim, or the human component, which reacted. And then you have the synthesis, which is the coming together or the grafting or stitching of different bloodlines. And again, that this would be represented by a family tree. The idea of a serpent within a tree is very closely related to this idea of a grafted bloodline. In the Greek, you would have the etymology of klon, which is a twig, which is related to a clone. So again, this grafting of bloodlines. But there is this within the priesthood, the split between what is ostensibly a humanist tradition, and then there is this non-human tradition. And they are antagonistic, and this certainly goes back in the ancient world. So for example, you have Zeno of Citium, if I'm remembering this correctly. Now Zeno wrote about the Republic. Now, he was a little bit different from Plato, because Plato talked about the Republic, but he talked about the royal bloodlines controlling the Republic. Zeno was actually saying that humans should be able to control the Republic. Now, Zeno, the etymology of Zeno is coming from Xenos, which is an alien, which is used in the old languages to refer also to an angel. So but this angelic tradition split with what can be described as the draconian or seraphic tradition, and it basically argued that human beings should be allowed to represent themselves. Now, Zeno of Citium is where you get the Hebrew word kittim, which is an idolatry. So Zeno's theories were certainly not very popular within the Hellenist school or the Elohim school, because it was seen as being a direct split. So this idea that the angelic bloodlines, such as lordship, would govern, and that they were the mediators between heaven and earth, was suddenly challenged within the ancient world with the idea of the Republic, and this idea that humans who were not identified with the bloodlines, such as lordship, could actually take control of the state. And so that was a very radical and a very new idea. And it is basically at the basis of all wars on the planet today.
And when you say, okay, so you're saying that we have a humanoid faction that, well, I guess the preliminary question I would need to paraphrase this would be, so at a certain stage, or possibly even in other spaces, you're saying that the humanoid is at a state of intelligence and rulership and power, but there's another also faction that is, if you may, a rival to that status. Is that what you're saying?
Well, within angelology, and you look at the seraphim, underneath the seraphim are the cherubim. I describe them as proto-human. Now, the cherubim are not sexually compatible with the seraphim. Now, I believe that the creation of the Adamic human was to create a race of humanoid being, which ostensibly are human, but they are compatible with both of these factions. And again, this led to the grafting of bloodlines, or the stitching together of bloodlines, which relates to the Nephilim and the traditions of the Nephilim. Now, the etymology of Nephilim, Nephil, a giant, Nephil, which is fallen, is related in the Semitic, in the Aramaic, to Nephilia, which is Orion. And again, the Nephilim are also referred to the mighty men of the giants, the Gibborim. Gibor in the Arabic is Orion. So these are all esoteric signifiers of Orion. But again, when we're looking at panspermia, the Elohim themselves are identified with panspermia, and they're closely synonymous with the Ben Sira, the sons of a boat. Now, the Ben Sira, son of a boat, is another metaphor. Malak, an angel, is related to Malak, which is a sailor. Now, it's a special type of wordplay, because Ben Sira, Sira is the Hebrew word for a boat, but Sira, or in the Arabic, relates to Sira, which is Sirius. So the Ben Sira, the son of a boat, is used as a code word to denote the sons of Sirius. So it is a diptych paranomasia, or a wordplay which is transferred from the Arabic into the Hebrew. And you find a lot of these different types of wordplays between the Greek and the Arabic, and the Hebrew and the Arabic. So again, this is very important. And so, for example, within so within Egyptian symbolism, for example, you would have, well, in English, we would say a bark, which is a type of ship or a boat, which is referring to a dog, which is related to the dog star. But again, within the Hebrew, Sira, boat, is related to the etymology of Sira, which is a wolf, or the plural noun in the Arabic for a wolf. So again, it's a type of bark, which is represented as a genie's lamp. I mean, in the symbolism, this is going back to the genie's lamp. So again, that's very interesting. And that goes into the traditions of the jinn. So the seraphim and the jinn are one and the same.
And let me ask you this, Pierre, then. So I'm going to do a share screen really quick here. Is it then, because, you know, I'm definitely going to do the best that I can also to, you know, to filter this knowledge for everyone that's tuning in today, so that they can get a complete understanding of what's going on. And then also, I'm going to, you know, start sending some questions your way, because there are many that are just interested in specific things that we feel that you can give us some insight on. Now, the first thing is I'm trusting that everybody can actually, excuse me, let me just do a different version of the share screen. Give me one quick second. Let me stop that share and do this one. All right. Let me push this over and make sure everybody can see this. So
I can see
is
it.
is it safe to say at this stage, because you mentioned the cherubim, and it's almost like, so you're saying that on one side is the cherubim and this is the closest to the humanoid composite. Is this because
Yes,
this
that's
is
right.
more of a mammalian, or is it,
Yeah,
does that have a genetic connection to it?
yes, all of the above. First of all, felines are the closest species to humans, with the exceptions of higher primates. So they're very, very closely related to humans. So much so that in terms of pollution, when cats start dying, humans start dying also. So if, for example, with fracking, if cats start dying, then you know that we're in for a rough ride. So feline is used to represent the human element, which is mammalian. It's also a hunter as well, and this idea of a serpent being a hunter and the lion being a hunter is very important. But
Okay.
again, you've got it, astrologically it relates to Orion. The lion is closely grouped with Orion.
Okay, so this makes perfect sense too, because we also see this in nature. Like you,
Mm.
really, the cat is the only, well, the bird also, but the cat is really in itself the direct adversary of the snake at
Mm.
times. Meaning they can stay in the paint together,
That's right.
and so also it seems like that the matriarchal side. Now that you're mentioning it, because we see some stuff that's an undertone of a matriarchal serpentine kind of thing, but more than that, especially in history, you see this
Yeah.
matriarchal feminine or feline side of things. So
Yeah.
would it be safe to go as far back and say that you had this feline or lion kind of bloodline going on here, and then all of a sudden there's a conflict between the lion blood type and the snake
Yeah.
blood type, if you may?
Yes, there was definitely a conflict, and this conflict is still going on. I mean, remember also that cats are also nocturnal, so this is symbolic of the nocturnal priesthood. But again, we've got
Okay.
to be careful not to be too fixed in our symbolism, because what tends to happen is that symbols are duplex, and by this I mean that they're duplicitous. So they often symbolize two ideas simultaneous. So, for example,
Right.
the lion is traditionally used to represent, is used as a solar motif, but also within the hidden priest representative of this lunar tradition as well. So we're seeing the switching over of signifiers, and this is very important to understand when we're dealing with symbolism. So if you show the image, which you just showed me there, of the angel, if you join again, if you notice, if you can see the four wings, these wings here are showing the profile of the serpent's mouth. So this is the serpent, and then this is identified with the lion. And notice that they're also shaking hands as well. And this is found within Freemasonry. Typically, you would have the set square and the compass. And in between, you would have two hands shaking with the G sign. Now, many people say that the G sign represents God or it represents Gnosis, but in actual fact, it's representing the Gibberim, which is this coming together of two lineages, which are represented by Orion, the star system Orion.
Okay.
Gibberim.
Okay. So, and also, weren't these Jabirim in themselves related to being giants in the
Yes,
Bible, or something like
they were
this?
mighty. Yes, they were mighty men. They were giants. So yes, they are one and the same. They are known also as the Anaki, not to be confused with the Anunnaki, but the Anaki. Now, Anaki means a giant. Anaki, the sons of Anak, the sons of the giants, Anaki, gigantic, is related to the Greek word Anax, or the Phoenician word Anax, which is a prince. So this is again a princely lineage. And again, we said that there was this prince and Zar, which was an angel or an alien, which are going back to Cyril, which is a boat, which is Sirius, the sons of Sirius, which goes back into the traditions of panspermia and the second creation. So,
Well, also, Pierre, I wanted to ask you, because, remember, we don't have much time with you, and there's always been some stuff. I think me and you personally have been planning on this interview for at least the last 2 years, right? So I got some stuff, and I really, because you're rapid fire, so it's good that you can actually get a lot of these questions out and complete, and in a way that we also can verify because of the linguistic system that's there. And let me ask you this now: in this standard, let's say, motif of the lion
Yeah.
tribe. The female
Yeah.
actually seems to be the more aggressive. Can you speak any to, because it seems like now there's a lot of this, everything
Yeah.
seems patriarchal, but do we deal with
It's-
that back there? There's really a matriarchal side to this. How is that working?
Yeah, that is exactly how it is. Of course, you're straight on. You're straight onto the money there. That's exactly true. So, patriarchal priesthood, but it's not patriarchal; it's matriarchal, and this is important because the female controls what the male thinks through the mother tongue. So, if you control the female, you control the rest of society. So, the
Yes.
priesthood is controlled, but ostensibly on the surface it appears to be patriarchal, but it's not. And again, this is going back into conjoined bloodlines, or these stitched or grafted bloodlines as they were described in the ancient world. So that's a very important point, because this would interlink with a female division of the Illuminati, which are part of what can be described, I describe it as the tripartite Illuminati, or the three divisions of the Illuminati. Again, this is going back into the anthropos, because the anthropos and the corruption of the anthropos, or the corruption of the humanoid, is central to this division between these different factions. Now, the anthropos can be divided into three sections. So you have Seraph, which is the serpent, and Serapha, which is fire. This is the tripartite Illuminati. You've got Ish, which is man, and Esh, which is fire. And then you've got this conjoined lineage, or this neophyte, literally the newly planted, Photon, which is a plant, and Thot, which is light. So three parts of the Illuminati. The anthropos, with tradition, are traditionally represented as being an angel, a jinn or a daemon, and the human component. But the jinn or the daemon were often represented as the hemithoi, or the half-god, or these demigods. So these are the three. It's a very, very simple, it's a simplification, because obviously we're dealing with many different species of beings which are interacting on the earth. But the anthropos is important in terms of, although other species are visiting this planet, they are not, shall we say, as actively engaged as what we're dealing here with the symbolism of the seraphim and their bloodlines, which are partitioned between the human and the non-human elements. So in some respects, it's a simplification, because there are players on this planet who are much more active, who, if you like, literally own this planet. So
So you're also, so you're saying then that, let's say the agreement, because we see a lot of this also even in occultism, that there's like a sacred marriage, if you may, and this is to unite the upper and the lower. So are human beings playing the, as you're saying, they're developing a second blend, if you may. Are they cognates of these two forces, especially in certain nations where some are more of the seraphim, while some are more of the other, but they've already blended into these races?
Now, this is a very important point, because when you begin to break down the symbolism, the controllers of the world are really these conjoined lineages. But what they tend to do is that they tend to emphasize either a human element more, or a seraphic element. And again, you can pick up this within the media and occult. So, for example, if you watch anything with anything like a serpent on, a seraphim, or anything, I watched a kid's cartoon recently. I'm just trying to think what it was. It was a Japanese one, and there was a cat, and it was this type of bus which ran up. And after it showed you this cat, it showed you a frog. So the reptile on the line is always shown. It doesn't matter. On Star Trek, it was the same. There was a shapeshifter, and then there was a black cat. It's like, what's a black cat doing on the Starship Enterprise? But it's the same type of symbolism. Again, if you looked at the angel Lilith, Lilith, a night demon, she is usually combined either with the owl or with the two cats, which would be symbolic of the Levite priesthood. Lavi, which is a lion, but this interconnection between the priestly or human element and then this non-human element, and the juxtaposition between the two and the grafting together of the two.
Okay, that's okay. So that actually, that really speaks to a lot, because in many essence, and I guess we find undertonings of this in spiritual literature, but that the humans are kind of like carrying out, let's say, a proxy war from these different factions. Would you agree to that? That, you know, there
Absolutely.
seems to be, and then why is there still, is this just a natural, like, you know, how some, let's say if I'm in, I don't know, a gladiator, it's all in our group to keep clashing against each other and strengthening each other, and the weakest one gets killed. Are we talking about this kind of air going on where there's not like one that's, oh, I just want to help the humans, and then another one that's like, oh, you know, we want to destroy them? Or is it really just a continuous proxy going on, and that Earth is just one planet that is a part of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it works out too well for men in the future. I actually think that we've been killed and destroyed and we've been replanted on the earth. Again, this is based upon fragments that I've been able to pick up within Greek mythology. So essentially what happens is that there is this war in heaven. The proto-humans are related to the Pleiades. There is this corruption of the anthropos, which are the blending together of the races between the seraphim and the cherubim. There's a war in heaven, which is the Titanomachy, which is the war of the Titans, the clash of the Titans, this great big battle in heaven, to the falling of the angels, or the fallen seraphim, and then humans are annihilated and are replanted on the earth. So in a sense, we're living, yeah, we've so, but again, because you're dealing with a holographic culture, and
Yeah, because that's what I was going to get to in a minute, because we got a technological component that's also in play here, especially with the reptilian.
So they can rewrite history, and again,
or more or less like reanimate, if you may.
yes, okay. Well, there are parallel dimensions, and it's which different timeline do you go down? I mean, there are better versions of this reality, so to speak. And so controlling timelines, I think, is very important. And so this is something that we need to keep at the back of our minds, although it's obviously very, very difficult for us to comprehend this because we're not part of the circle of knowledge. And I use the term circle of knowledge here to refer to the ophanim, which are the wheels, which, when we're dealing with it, is really the missing link, because the ophanim wheels are represented as links. So the missing link is the ophanim wheels, which are the planting of the Adamic man upon the earth. And remember that the etymology of Adam is related to Machadim, which is Mars, and Adam is also related to Kadim, which is a servant. So man is living in servitude. And
you know what's interesting, because even the imagery around the ophanim, you know, obviously this group is very adept. We even gave some disclaimers about, you know, I don't know how many disclaimers, but everybody here is really advanced in the metaphysics. And also, you know, just like such as yourself, you know, I see that, you know, you obviously have this level of knowledge, and it seems to be a lineage of this type of knowledge. And now it's passing through you, especially as being a Sabak. And in that, it's almost like there's this off limits knowledge, if you may, but it's been bleeding in through the DNA that maybe some of us are even carrying of some of these factions, if you may, that gets triggered. And then also when you have something like language, you almost can put a puzzle together. And in that, we start to see that maybe there is, well, not maybe, but some have already begun to see, especially in lucid dreaming, alternate realities and being able to get into those realities. But this will also explain why there's so much, you know, just kind of confusion overall, if especially there was a war that took place, and this is more or less the aftermath or the treaty that was signed after that war, especially when you're dealing with beings that live. It's a
covenant of worlds, which is represented by Orion. So the covenant of worlds is represented through the star system Orion. This is why it's so important within symbolism. And you'll see the symbolism of the Pleiades, Orion, and Sirius featured throughout. So the blazing star, which is related to the Watchers, is the Seraphim, so Sophefa Watchers. Seraph, which is a serpent, Serapha, which is fire, can be represented as a blazing star, which is Sirius. Those who are born of fire, which are the Jinn, are the Seraphim. You've got the Syrian star. You've got, within Judaism, you've got Menorah, which is the Pleiades, and then you've got Orion, which is featured everywhere as well within the symbolism of the pyramids, for example. So it is. Yeah.
One of the questions here is that you mentioned the Sabian and the Hellenistic, and what are the origins of these two terms in short script? somebody is asking. And I
Right.
know Sabian is obviously like a seven or a Saba, right? Or something of this nature, even a
Yeah.
Sab
Okay.
is
Well,
all direct words.
you've got Sibylla and Sibyl and Sabi. So the Sibyl, the Arabic word Sabar or Sabi is a priest and is related to Sibyl. Now, Sibylla was the Akkadian word for an oracle priest. But again, we're seeing that there are etymological correspondences with Saba, which is a star, Zib, which is a wolf. Wolf is used in this respect to refer to Canis Major, the dog star. So very important signifier within symbolism. And so, so for example, in English, you'll find the relationship between God and dog. In Arabic, it would be Allah, God, and Awa, which is to bark.
And so why, I want to know why is that there? Because now we got the cats and
Yeah,
now we got the dog. So do they always just play this because it's not even a play, it's almost like even in nature. So is there always, they balance out with this other opposing component?
Yeah, well, there is. Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, it goes on and on and on. Lato is a polo. Latro is to bark or to snarl. It's related to latens, which is to hide or to conceal. Again, the Sodi priesthood is related to Sophis, which is the old word for Sirius. Again, in the Japanese tradition, Kami is God, Kami is a wolf, and the wolf relates in this respect to the Tengu, which is heaven's dog, which is this reptilian entity. So these are all polyglottal symbols which are pointing to this higher truth, this idea of the seraphim or the jinn, which planted life upon the earth, which is this second creation. So it's found within our symbolism, and I refer to this as the artifact. The artifact is an alien code which has been inserted into language. It's been inserted in order to control how we think, so to manipulate how we think at an ideological level. So yeah, I think this is.
And so when you're saying that, because I like that, so you're saying the artifact, if you may, like something like maybe even a form of technology, like a program is placed into the DNA or into the consciousness, and then this starts to change the way that others think and believe. So is there a linguistic structure that is operating outside of the one that we're using? Is the current linguistic system really the control structure, and then there's this other language that nobody knows?
Well, try and get your head around this. They are the predator, and they've given us their way of thinking, but it's not a mammalian way of thinking. So we don't really know how to think as a human being because we haven't been taught how to think like a human being. It's a very profound idea, but it has also to do with connotations of time and this idea that, so for example, modern languages are very aggregate. They separate everything between a noun and a verb. But in certain languages, there isn't this juxtaposition between object and verb. So for example, within some of the North American Indian languages, you wouldn't just have a buffalo. It would be, well, what is the buffalo doing? Is it sitting? Is it sleeping? It affects the noun. So there's much more, shall we say, symbiosis between the observer and the observed. It's not differentiated. It's not segregated. It's not separated. And I think that this is one of the ways in which they've actually controlled the human race is segregation of ideas, this idea that we're all separated and different, when in actual fact, we're not. You know, the waveform extends into eternity. So your particles, my particles, and everyone else's particles at some level are all interrelated. And this is a very profound and very spiritual idea, which goes into Gnostic ideas, well, of the aeon, which is the age, which is the projection of the hologram, the emanation of the divine, from the implicated order, which is the spiritual order or the order of dreams, to the physical reality, to the manifestation of the physical. And the imagination is the spiritual realm. So this is why.
And you know, it's interesting, not to cut you off, but it's interesting that I think, okay, so one of the gentlemen that's done a lot of research on just how the body works starts to show basically that if we have like love and empathy, then our DNA braids, like we're able to actually accomplish this time travel, if you may, through bliss and through implosion. And
Yeah.
so it also seems like as aggressive as they are, it seems like that's what they would have the biggest problem with. So is the real
Yeah.
deal here like the difference between some that can't actually even feel love versus those that through their mammalian or warm side can still tap into those energies? Or
Okay.
is that
Right. I think that's a really interesting, and I've thought about this quite a lot. And I think when you're dealing with advanced holographic cultures, so these are races which have deconstructed the mechanics of reality. So they are aware of the spiritual realm. They are aware of time travel. They can make themselves invisible technologically. They can communicate to those who are deceased through the spirit. They can plant bodies. So when you're dealing with cultures like this, essentially most cultures, I won't use the word evolve because I think that's a very problematic word, because really evolution suggests that there's a culmination, and there isn't, because everything is always changing. Everything is at the epitome, or it's perfect. It's already evolved. It's at the best at what it can be. But here, what we're really describing is sorry, I've just lost my track of my thought there. But yeah.
that's all right. It
It was
happens
an
to me all the
interesting.
time. I mean,
Sure,
it's
it
a
was an
lot of
interesting.
knowledge. A lot of people don't get that, but I'm sure you'll catch the wheel in just a moment. And
Yeah.
while that's happening, I
Yeah.
want you to address, before I even start getting into a couple of these questions, because in the holographic culture in the book, you have
Yeah.
this image on the cover. You have the alien gray. And
Yeah.
what I've been able to seem to see, and it's kind of like obvious for many people unless they're not watching. Now, the
Mm.
OTO and the Golden Dawn is in this time right now, I feel like the
Yeah.
most active, darker side of the occultism. It's kind of like back there as a spiritual reference to all these
Yeah.
secret societies if they want to get
Yeah.
involved. And obviously, Aleister Crowley and McGregor
Mm.
Mathers and Blavatsky
Mm.
were involved. But
Mm.
their central character is AWAS, which actually looks like an alien gray. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've seen this entity before, but I wanted to know from you
Yeah. I have.
personally,
Yeah.
what is the whole, are they really worshiping AWAS, and is he or it now in this format of the alien gray and actually giving them counsel as far as what should be done on the earth? Are they carrying now this this bloodline or this priestcraft to this next stage of fulfilling this being's wishes?
Okay, well, here you're asking me questions in which I'm not in the circle of knowledge. I know that the seraphim are a reptilian species, and I know that the grey alien is often seen anecdotally with the seraphim, but they do appear to be a different species. But how far different they are is basically, we can only speculate about that. But they are closely, certainly within the occult symbolism, they are closely connected. I can give you some examples of that. So for example, if we said that in Greek, theos, a god, is related to theoros, which is a watcher, and phos, which is light. As we said before, that this was the seraphim, so there is this connection between Thothep, a watcher, Seraph, a serpent, and Serapha, which is fire. Again, we would find the similar etymologies in fairy, fire, the same etymologies, ferry, which is a boat as well. So these etymologies are all playing out, but we find this also with the greys as well. So you have a greys, you have gaze, which is to watch, and then you have gloss, which is a type of luster, which is light. So the symbolism of the greys is actually playing into the symbolism of the theos, the god, Theros, watcher, and Phos, which is light. Again, in the Elohim are often described as Erin, which is a watcher. In the Testament of Amram, the Erin are described as having the countenance of a viper. So the etymology of Erin, the watcher, also means a shining one, and is closely related to the Elohim, which are the high ones. So the watchers themselves symbolize the dragon. So drakon is to watch or to flash. It's coming from the root drakane, which is to shine or to watch. So
And it's interesting, this whole watching concept, which I even think is now playing out in the technology and social media, and them just watching everybody's profiles. Now here's an image that actually comes from Ingle Swan's book Penetration, which was of course about the governments conducting into what is that remote viewing. and
Yes.
the idea of even remote viewing the other side of the moon. But I found that the cover itself, again, is very interesting because it, again, shows the larger brain and then the idea
Yeah.
of the watching and the
Mm.
penetration of
Mm.
watching the species. Why is it so important for them to watch every damn thing? It's like, what does that mean? Are they
Okay.
guards?
No. This is what. Look at the etymology again. In English, we would say God. Guard is the old root to what? Old roots to watch. Greek, theos, God. Theos, watcher. Phos, which is life. Seraphim, seraph. Sophia for watcher. Seraph or seraphim. And Serapha, which is fire. So these are all polyglottal symbols. These are all pointing to the idea that the gods are the watchers, and they're represented as a dragon. Drakon is to watch or to flash. So we know that we're dealing here with the seraphic host or the seraphic component. As I said before, Yahweh Sabaoth is related to Saba, which is an army. Seva, which is a crew member of a vessel. But again, it's closely related to Sepheth, which is a viper. So this is the seraphic host. Now, watching is important because essentially the most important commodity in the universe is knowledge. So they are mining knowledge, they are mining human intelligence, and they're doing it through emergent systems, and they're doing
Wow.
this on multiple planets. So this is the basis. They are a predaceous species, and this is going back to what I was saying earlier when I forgot about what I was talking about. But essentially, generally speaking, holographic cultures, they move towards equilibrium, right? But there are always exceptions to rules. You get some which are very, very spiritual, very rare, but it happens. And then you get some which are very predaceous, again, which is rare, but they control the show. They control most equilibrium. So this is what we're dealing here. We're dealing with a predaceous species, and it's controlling the show. It's the top dog. It uses emergent systems in order to retain its control, because it's aware that there are other predaceous species which are also, let's say, expanding, and so therefore this is what it's doing. Knowledge is the most important commodity within the universe.
Okay.
So
And Peter, I want to ask you a question. When you see, like, I'm out in Costa Rica and there's all these different varieties of insects. So when you say other predaceous species, are you saying that even outside of this, let's say the lion, the snake, the goat, etc., that there are other forms that are on their own sentience and also,
yeah,
working with the holographic level of their
yeah,
awareness? Because I even
absolutely.
find a lot of the insects sound actually like electronics in many ways.
Yes, yeah. And again, they're playing with vibration. And I think that this is very important, because when you look at our holographic culture, this is what I describe as Pythagorean physics. Pythagoras talked about a monochord. This was the monochord which stretched from heaven, which was the quickest vibration, which is the spirit, down to matter, which is the slowest vibration. Now, therefore, different dimensions are represented according to Pythagoras as different octaves or different vibrations. Now, again, this links in both, which is sort of music in time, and then you've got, this relates also to geometry as well. So different vibrations relate to different types of geometry, which relates to different types of forms. So again, this idea that there could be different forms according to different vibrations and different levels or different parallel dimensions would actually make sense, that you would see different types of entities. But again, you're going to be dealing with certain shapes which continually reappear. I mean, so for example, on a different planet, a fish will always be a fish, and you will find in many worlds that fishes look very similar, in the same way that the anthropos looks very similar. So you have these sentient beings which are humanoid. And again, the terminology anthropos in the Greek was used to refer to an alien. And so therefore, they would refer to them as human-like. They would describe them as humanoid, not in a literal sense, but that was in a deferential sense. It was saying that these are human-like. They are sentient. So, but again, they described them as strange and unusual or alien. So again, it's very interesting how they use the language to convey similar ideas. So yes, the Pythagorean system of the monochord is important. And it's also found within the idea of the aeon as well. Now, the aeon means age, and it's represented as this concentric circle. Now, the concentric circle, when you begin to break it down, is a type of interference pattern, which is a type of hologram. So when the vibration reaches a certain level, it emits light. So from vibration, it emits light, which releases form. And this is very important because the aeon interconnects with what is known as the soul pattern, which is everyone's got this soul pattern, which goes back both into the past and into the future. And in a sense, it doesn't really matter because the soul can be incarnated into the future or into the past. And so mastery of the soul pattern amongst the initiates was very important. One of the ways in which you would actually control the soul pattern would be through the dream, which is the spiritual level of reality. And this is why in near-death experience, often the near-death experience is very hallucinogenic. It's very much like a dream, but we know it's not a why we know it's not a dream is because blind people who've never seen before have near-death experiences in which they can see. So we therefore know that this is not a type of an hallucination, but is actually fundamental to the mechanics of the soul being released from the body. And essentially it's going back into the spiritual Plato referred to as the universal forms. This is the world or realm of ideas, where universal forms are then particularized or they're manifested physically as particular forms. And so that's the juxtaposition of the aeon, or the projection of the aeon into holographic reality, which is this physical reality, which we all know at one level is an illusion because it's made of photons, which they're not solid. So,
okay, so you're saying, just like, I think someone has this question here on the bottom, but it kind of connects in with this because it's actually about, a lot of the Toltec traditions in relation to dreaming.
yeah.
And they even said that the dream body in that body of knowledge is 7 times stronger than the physical body as far as what it's capable of. So are you saying, of course, there's attraction even for a lot of people that want to lucid dream. Are you saying that the dream world really is the stage in itself for the consciousness and how it really functions, as far as that multidimensionality and all of that goes on there, that is generally the first playing field, and that this one is more of a locked in phase of awareness?
Yes, I'm saying that by controlling the dreamscape, you actually control physical reality, and they understood this. So it's very fundamental, but it's also fundamental in terms of controlling one's next incarnation. So for example, the adepts would be interested in controlling their incarnations and incarnate a version of the past or into the better version of the future. Now, of course, some people would want to be integrated with the light, but not everybody wants to be integrated with the light. Some people like be expressing themselves in the form, in the physical form. And so it's about actually being able to control that and steering that, navigating that. And that's very important. But again, it goes back to the dream world in terms of you can control and manipulate the dream world, then you can actually control physical reality, because the two are interrelated. You have the universal forms, which are the ideas, which are then particularized in the physical world. So.
Okay, now that it's interesting, because I wanted to ask you a question about how this has progressed for you, because what you're saying is such deep metaphysical knowledge. I think that many people only get to that knowledge when they really start ending more or less their spiritual journey and path of study, especially when it starts to get to the point where you're dealing with this ultra technology. I like to see technology as not something that is from the future, but anything kind of external to self that advances or can give some level of advancement or repetition. So it sounds like what you're saying is that the dream playing field is been, because a lot of this has also been coming through lately, and it's just that you kind of get locked out of being able to control the dream. You go to sleep every night, you're thrown right into the middle of another experience, and then you wake up, and then this seems to be the only stable ground. But in itself, in the dream, it seems to be much more, there's much more possible in that space. So do they even control who can get into the dream, or do they like to do that through the foods and things?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting idea, but essentially what you're saying is that people forget their dreams and they are locked out of the dream. And this is what happens. You see, In the Gnostic system, forgetfulness is related to death. So the etymology of forgetting is related to death. And so therefore you have to remember, and part of remembrance is remembering your dreams. And by remembering your dreams, you are then able to access the spiritual realm. And therefore, once you die, you have then control within the spiritual realm to actually control and manipulate the incarnation, which is the soul pattern. So this is very intrinsic to actually manipulating not only here and now, but it's very fundamental to manipulating here and now, but it's also fundamental to manipulating where you want to be in the very past or in the very future, because it doesn't really matter, because time.
Okay, now that's interesting, because then if you never gain control, it's almost like this could play out infinitely, because you're not in what you really think that you're in. It's more like a sliding dimension. Okay, now that really, I think we're gonna have to even cut that out and get that on YouTube so people can kind of understand where this is coming from. I'm gonna start addressing just some of these questions here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I got into these ideas through studying Greek and but again, there's no books that you can really. I mean, I wrote a book called The Soul Pattern, but I haven't published it. Because it's editing and it's very complicated. It's full of etymology. But essentially, I got in through these. There aren't any books where you can read it and say, okay, soul pattern, yes, make sure. I learnt this through studying ancient etymology and through studying Greek and trying to piece it together and understand it for myself. So this is the basis of my understanding of this.
And why were the Greeks in themselves so, because they seem to do a lot, even within the language of phi and psi and all this, like what was their actual position in when their entry comes in, as far as did they become custodians themselves of the bloodline? Like why did they, because they developed, it seems like, a language and an actual copy paste of many even of the ancient systems, or were they just what do you call it, when it evolves, like this is the next?
Well, there are lots of cultures which were custodians of knowledge. So obviously they were important in terms of influencing Latin culture, and they were the dominant grouping within Europe. Yeah, they took over this region, but there are many custodians of knowledge, and there have been many influences. So again, it might be a little bit unfair to just emphasize Greek culture, but it's just something that I myself have studied. But you know, the traditions are all over the world.
And Pierre, are you saying that as far as, let's say, the oldest language, does that really start coming into, because you mentioned Euclid, does that come into shapes and archetypical ideas that evoke from shape and sound? Does it really start more or less there, or do we have an ancient language, if you may, that even comes from the stars?
Yes, I think that's an interesting idea. I mean, this goes into universal grammar. Universal grammar, you see in my book, Holographic Culture, amongst linguists, they've been arguing amongst themselves, is there universal grammar? It seems like that their mind is hardwired for language, and so there is this idea of universal grammar. Now, I've proved the existence of universal grammar through what I describe symbolism, so word plays which repeat in many different languages, and you find that there are they're not just one simple word play, but you'll find word chains of words which are interrelated in multiple different languages, and so this is indicative of a universal grammar. Now, where I beg to differ with the linguists about universal grammar is this is evidence of the alien artifact which is encoded within language. They would obviously say that it's hardwired within the human mind. I disagree with that. I think that this is part of the control mechanism. I think it's highly contrived. So I think that's...
well, that seems to bring us back to the Tower of Babel right there then. Let us go down and confuse them with languages. Is this the insert really taking place right there, or is this another event happening altogether?
Well, that's right. And again, once you get to writing as well, so writing can fundamentally change a language as well in terms of how is written. So, for example, an alphabet. So, for example, if you're using the alphabet kaki kuke ko, in terms of how you spell the words is how you would actually transliterate the words. So within a close community of speakers, if you actually implemented an alphabet in which suddenly large sections of the population can read or write, then you're influencing the language and the way in which words are pronounced, but also you're influencing the language formally. When you read something, it's very different to how you speak. There's a formal way of writing,
Yes.
and this is found within all languages. Like, for example, within Chinese, you have ideograms. So Chinese are much more bang, bang, bang with ideas. Which is a little bit European languages. Again, Hebrew. Hebrew books are shorter than in English because of they shorten the words. They don't have the vowels. So again, the language is like a type of shorthand. So
that's interesting. So you're saying that language, I always connected that in itself to the cabal or a cable, or basically the A to Z, that's something that's supposed to connect. And what you're saying is that there's even two forms of connection here, that you could even hear it and understand it that way and never write it, or you could write it and then somehow even come onto a different subset of it than if you were just speaking it only. And so there's a lot of control mechanisms just inside. It's very flexible, the code, if you may.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at the Quran, I mean, that's written in poetry. It's a poetic language.
Right.
Again, the Quranic tradition is based upon polymorphic language. This is something I go into in holographic culture. So, for example, you have polymorphic symbols. So words have multiple things. So, for example, the morning sun is also to mourn, because so it's related to death. But these are polyglottal and are found in many different wordplays, these word associations. So certainly within the Quranic tradition, you have what is known as Wujud al-Quran, which is the forgotten recitation. Recitation, it relates to a polymorphic word. So these polymorphic words are words with multiple meanings. So the Quran is written in polymorphic language with these multiple words. So in this respect, it can be understood to be a layered document. It's understood as being multifaceted. And this is very important. Again, Wujud al-Quran, the facets of the Quran, the faces of the Quran, the forgotten Quran. These are all, again, it's polymorphic. So the forgotten Quran is a polymorphic word, but it also relates to a facet of the Quran or the side of the Quran.
So this is like even in itself a form of encryption. Now,
yes,
this kind of brings me to a mindset of like, so if you're saying that, again, that many of these beings are operating in the hyperdimensional or in the astral aspect of things, I wanted to address very briefly this idea of interloping.
I want to emphasize here, and again, people can get very confused what I mean by a holographic culture, so I will try and nail this very succinctly for your viewers. Okay. So, for example, with the Elohim, described as an elake, which means literally a living God, but it's a polymorphic word. It can also mean a high creature. In modern parlance, or in contemporary idiom, we would describe an extraterrestrial biological entity. So we have the Elohim, which can be divided into an elake, which is a high creature, but they're all paradoxical language. They're also described as the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits. And this is because, although they're physical, they have the technological means to dematerialize. They can remain invisible, hence the connection with the jinn and janna, which is to hide or to conceal. So they are this hidden or invisible race. And this is because they are controlling the holographic level of reality. Okay. So they're physical beings. We should not think that they're just spiritual. And a lot of people get confused by this, but when you read apocryphal literature, it actually says that the angels and the demons, that they will be killed. And again, in the Quran, it says if he wishes that Allah could actually destroy or sink the ships. And he's talking about here the opening wheels. The opening wheels are the angels. So again, the connotation is that these are living beings which can actually be killed and that they are mortal. So these are mortal beings which are flesh and blood, but they have the added advantage that we don't have, and that is that they can disassemble the mechanics of reality, the quantum level of reality. Now, as a species, we are almost at the threshold of this. We are almost coming into what I would describe as being a holographic species. We're not that far away.
Okay, so that's the evolution. So you're saying that's the evolution jump, is basically assembly and reassembly, time travel, if you may. And this is a
Exactly.
natural aspect of the,
It's a game changer. It's a game changer.
okay,
It really is.
big game changer. It's like the difference between being invisible and visible. Like even the most weakest being, if being
Yeah.
invisible, has an extreme advantage to another one that can't see or sense them.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, in societies now,
Mm.
and let's say degrees. I always feel like that the degrees of knowledge, or even the degrees of Freemasonry, et cetera, are seeming to hint to
Mm.
almost possession by certain types of forms and the ability to be able to handle these forms. Do you have any references to, let's say, in these priestcrafts, that the actual human becomes the host to the actual entity, and then the entity is now utilizing the human as their voice box, if you may?
Yeah,
Is
yeah. I mean,
this
this is going
going
back
on at all?
into, yeah, of course it is. It's this is relating to demonic possession. Again, the etymology of daemon, ammon, which is to hide or to conceal, would relate to the jinn, and jana, which is to hide or to conceal. It's a polyglottal symbol. In the Apocrypha, it talks about that the souls can be planted into a body, which in today's idiom would be a type of walking. So yeah, the entities are able below what we actually think. I mean, this really goes back in the Arabian traditions to the Karin. The Karin is translated as a constant companion, but I prefer to use the word familiar spirit, because essentially the Karin is a type of familiar spirit, and again is
Hmm.
related to Kayin, which is a type of entity. So the Karin, again, are closely grouped with the Erin, which are the watchers, and is this type of jinn, which, as we said before, is related in the Old Semitic to Jen, a serpent, or a worm, which would be the seraphim.
And it
So,
seems to be a massive body of knowledge, almost kind of hidden though, but in certain cultures you hear about it, but a massive body of
again,
knowledge coming from the
we've,
Arabian
uh,
culture of
this is it. We've had disclosure. We had disclosure thousands of years ago. It's all over the pyramids. But
ah,
this is a it's an open secret, but it's only
okay.
to those who are initiated. But there are people all around the world who know this, and so the point is actually getting disclosure to the masses, because there
Yes.
are segments of the population who know about this already, and it's encoded everywhere, within our media, within our art, within our language, within our culture.
I also wanted to take a moment here to mention to everyone, especially that's just joining in on the line or may have came in midstream.
Mhm.
We're talking to Pierre Sabak. He's put together some amazing work here. I think that in itself, you don't have to really, let's say, take another person's word for it. You can actually go to the words and really
Mhm.
see what they mean. And Pierre has done that. And he's done that in such a proficient way over the years. I've always been like, even saying to myself, man, if they just knew what Pierre knew. And that would just like really demystify a lot of what
Thank you.
people think is going on. And I want to mention that your book, The Holographic Culture and the
Yep.
Murder of Reality, which is your
Yep.
first book, or
That's
I
my
know you
first.
have many works. Like these books are like this, by the way. I still
Yeah.
got some over there, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I play it like an 8 ball. I just open it up and then like I read what's there and it seems to speak to me, and then I
Just read
just
the
okay,
paragraph. Yeah.
I got my download for the day. But I
Yeah.
just want to let everybody know here that especially if some of this is flying over your head, it's going too
Mm.
fast or whatever, because we don't have the brevity of
Yeah.
time all the time. So I just wanted to say you can actually jump on Pierre's site. Somebody will share
Mm.
the link here in the chat now,
Mm. Thank you.
and you can actually check out these works and really get into this etymology to understand what's being said, and then
Well,
it seems
I
to unlock
do.
quite a bit for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to emphasize, I mean, these are not frivolous works. My first book took me 7 years to research. The thing is that
Exactly.
what I'm talking about, nobody knows about. It's not common knowledge. So it's not like you can just pick up a book and read about it, because you can't. It's encoded within language. And so I spent my time trying to particularly look at the similarity and the correlations between different languages, and there is this universal code, and it's uniformal, and it's basically the artifact, as I said before, this code which has been inserted into human language. And so, and again, my second book, Holographic Culture, that took 8 years to put together, but I publish more work. I have a body of work which I'm actually trying to put together and publish, because I'm just always writing. So
You know, it's interesting, Pierre, because I feel like that oftentimes even the word backwards hints that the whole thing is going backwards, and we may have done all of this before. And I think you've even chimed in a little bit about there being something that happened and that this is kind of the fallout of it. But what it also kind of brings to is,
so
yes,
for
exactly.
example,
And that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And this is important as well, because you can tune into the soul, you can tune into your own soul pattern, and therefore you can tune into different versions of yourself at different time zones and different realities. And so this is in itself very important, because the soul itself is tuned into many different realities that have occurred and realities that will occur. As we said before, there is no differential between time. So this is a Gnostic teaching. And again, I think you see, and this is how closely it's interrelated. There's this Gnostic body of work, which goes back to the seraphic tradition, which deals with the mechanics of the soul. And then you have, if you like, the scatological tradition, or the study of angelic boats and vessels within ancient religion and mythology, which I look at. And again, when we're dealing with abduction, so for example, the abduction phenomenon, this is world. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, well, abductions, that's only a very recent thing, but it's not. It goes back to the nympholeptus, or to be taken by the nymphs. And when we look at the etymologies with all of these different deities, you find that there are these relationships. So, for example, Seraph is related to Chauvet, which is a captor. Again, this is a morphological transition on the word, and this is how words and the permutations of words actually work etymologically through these morphological permutations. You find that there's a correspondence between theos, God, thera, which would be to trap. Again, it's closely related to the etymology of a shield. And again, if you look at the symbolism, for example, of Athena, sometimes she'll have a shield, and behind the shield there is a serpent. And again, it's working on Arabic etymology. So, for example, what the priesthood like to do is they always like people to be one step behind. So, for example, if you go to church, everyone's speaking Latin, and then when you go to Latin churches, everyone's speaking Greek, and on and on. And it was the same with the classical priesthood as well, you know, so everyone would be speaking Greek, and then they'd be speaking Arabic or Aramaic. So, for example, you've got the shield, Junna, which is a shield, which is a scatological signifier, as we said, of a boat, but is related to Jen. So the serpent is hidden behind the shield, which is concealed, Jana, which is to hide or to conceal. And again, it's denoting the seraphic host of these non-human angels, which we described as the seraphim, which goes back to this idea of a sailor. Seraph, a serpent, Sapan, which is a seaman or a sailor, and Safina, which is a ship or a boat. So this is part of what I describe as the scatological tradition, the study of angelic boats and vessels, which are represented as these circular arcs, which belong to an archon. So an arc is a curve, but is also a type of a boat, which is related to an archon, which is an angel or a ruler.
Yes.
So,
and Pierre, let me ask you this, because also I was saying that since, let's say, time is non-linear in this tense, and it's almost like maybe some of us are doing the same thing over and over again, or at least once, or trying to fulfill something. And even us coming together today, I think is a big part of that, because this is the greatest arcana that really, if you understand the body of occult knowledge, you have to have a master key, if you may. And this is the master key that floats through all of the systems of linguistics that actually give us the complete story. But within that, because I mean, I read that you even, obviously you did the documentary, you had an opportunity to even photograph Artifact R. It also seems, so basically what I wanted to get to is that it seems like that you're this being that is like a fifth column. Now you've been able to get this knowledge and start bringing this knowledge to humanity. And you've even had some close scaves, if you may, with the actual stuff through just circumstances and humbugs. Like, do you make notations of that personally yourself, that it's something strange going on with you as far as being able to be aware of this kind of knowledge in a time where you got billions of people that don't actually know about this? Like, how do we justify those kind of ratios with this level of knowledge? Or how do you justify it? Not us, but how do you, go deal with that personally?
Yeah. that is a tricky question. I think that there's a lot of synchronicity, and I think what you will find is, well, when I wrote the Murder of Reality, I showed the book to my father, and I think when I completed the Murder of Reality, I was about 36 years old, and then my father told me a secret which he'd never told anyone, and essentially his secret society or a secret order, which I'm not affiliated to, and I don't agree with, because I don't think that knowledge should be secret. I actually think that it should be out there within the open. And again, I believe that men should actually rule and represent themselves. And again, that this is very difficult when I'm actually trying to discuss politics with my friends, because my friends are about political system that they think that they understand, but the political system is based upon well, the ship of state is a representation of the classical tradition. Classis is a naval fleet. The naval fleet is this angelic tradition, Malak an angel, Malak a sailor, which relates to class. One who is born of a boat, we would say lordship, kingship. And so within the European Union and what's happening in terms of, do we have a republic or don't we have a republic? How can human beings talk about whether we can or can't have a republic when they're not aware of this idea of these grafted bloodlines and the idea of lordship and kingship? It's
right.
Fundamentally, it's difficult to actually discuss it at a political level, because you're dealing here with government. Gubernatio is to steer a boat or a vessel. A cabinet, again, a cabin of a ship or a boat. So a minister as well, in the Greek, uperetz, which is a minister, eretz, which is a rower, one who steers or a tiller of a boat or a vessel. So these are all terminologies which are referring to the ship of state. The ship of state is anchored or moored to heaven, which is religion. As we said, worship in the Arabic, sabah is to praise or glorify. Sabaoth is the host. The host is this heavenly crew, which are related to Sevet, which is a crew of a vessel. It's the same within the Greek symbolism. With the harpies, you've got the harpies or apue, which is an abductor, which is related to erpaton, which is a reptile. You've got opal, which is again a symbol of the angelic host. And again, the etymology is related to shine as well, and pleon, which is a boat, oplon, which is a shield. As we said, that these circular shields are used in the classical symbols to denote a heavenly boat or a vessel. In the Semitic traditions, traditionally it was a wheel. The wheel could be combined with a throne, so you would have the throne chariot. The throne chariot is a type of this angelic vessel, but the wheel, the chariot, the ship are all interrelated. And again, the word chariot in the Greek comes from the etymology of harmos, which is to join. And this is because we're seeing that the mind is like a vehicle. So there is this connection between nous, which is a ship, nous, which is the mind, and pneuma, which is the spirit. So the mind is a vehicle, and it's described that way in the Greek as we would describe it within the English. But this is going back to a secret tradition. Gnosis is related to nous, which is a boat, which is this secret tradition appertaining to this classical tradition, or classis, which is this naval or angelic, which are identified with class and the sons of a boat. And we are kept out of the loop on this. And this is very important, because how do we discuss and talk about politics when we are not in the loop about this? And this is a fantastic time to be alive, because this information is coming out. The genie is out of the bottle. They cannot keep this secret any longer. We are living in times.
Yes,
So,
and I feel that in also in concluding what you're saying, I feel like that it's bleeding over. Let's say, like maybe you said that maybe your father was a part of something, he knew a bit more. I may not have disclosed that to you, but genetically somehow, because you guys are carrying the same genetics. So in that, what dreams are made out of, the memory bank is still there, and you've been able to tap in that memory bank. And I've also run into a few other of even my friends that have names that seem to be calibrated perfectly towards things that seem to be indicating that they're gods. But and they have like this weird thing going on with them and this knowledge and information, but they're not in part of societies or anything like that. So it's just almost abstract for them. But like they're the children of this. Is this what we're possibly dealing with? Is even the next level of maybe how the game changes here? Is that some of the children of those that have been aware of this knowledge and the powers that exist are coming into their awareness and maybe going to assemble in
Well,
some way? I mean, that may
I
sound
think
hopeful, but
you see
I think,
again, probably realize this yourself. There are a lot of people who are studying the occult, and then when you break it down, their family are part of this occult tradition. And often the people who've been studying the occult have not realized this, or they've only found out about this many, many years after they've written books. And it was the same with me. My father claimed to be a key holder. He claimed to be the last key holder. He said that there were nine keys. Now, he said that all of these keys were evil, but he said he'd changed the keys and he'd made some of the keys good. And so I would like to think that I'm a part of that tradition to actually bring out some of this information. But as I said before, my dad didn't tell me about this. So I didn't know about this. He told me about it when I wrote The Murder of Reality. And my dad said, he read the book and he said, I've kept this secret for all these years. I was going to die with this secret. But he said, you have earned the right to know. And so he told me, basically.
wow. Okay, Peter, I'm going to start blowing through these questions. Believe it or not, those are all my questions that I just, those are all mine. But let me let me just blow through some of these questions. One of the questions here is about the bloodline. Actually, this question is the Sumerian language not an isolated, I guess they're saying not an isolated language, but instead archaic Tamil? Do you have anything to lend towards that question? It's a bit confusing to me, but if you want to move on.
No, yeah, I'll deal with the Sumerian language. I'm not that convinced that the Sumerian language has been decoded. If it's not related to any of the Indo-European languages, then how would you actually decode it? I know that traditionally they said that there were dictionaries in the Akkadian of Sumerian language. I'm not that convinced. I do think that the Sumerian language is ancient. I do think it's key to understanding a lot of this knowledge. But we saw this type of deception with the hieroglyphs as well. The hieroglyphs have not been decoded. The hieroglyphs, many of the hieroglyphs are just incorrect. They just do not make sense in terms of what the pictures are showing in terms of the Semitic languages. But the deception is very clever. It's a very clever deception. So, for example, you'll find these word plays which are playing out within the hieroglyphs, which are occult within occult in terms of the symbols. So, for example, the hieroglyph may give you a clue to what the actual meaning of the glyph is, without telling you what the meaning is, or they'll play word plays on the Latin or Greek. So it's so I'll give you an example. If you look at Horus, traditionally he's rendered as Ars, which means the High One. Now he's represented as a hawk. Now the hawk is very important because obviously the hawk represents a watcher. So but within the Arabic, you've got the word Ba, which is a type of hawk. But in the Aramaic, Ba means sun. So Ha rhymes with Ba, which is a sun. But in this respect, a son of a hawk would be a son of heaven. Now, they're a peripatetic bird. In this, they're a migratory species. So if you want to, so the hawk represents an alien who is not indigenous. So the hawk represents a son of heaven. And again, these type of wordplay.
Wow, that's pretty. That's what you're saying. Like they're layered. Like they're very layered with their awareness.
It's not just random. They're not just putting any old rubbish in there. The coding is, and so we need to go back to the hieroglyphs, and they need to be decoded properly because there's something in there which they're hiding, and they don't want us to know about. But fortunately, the scholars at Oxford are not doing their job properly, and they're just repeating this gibberish ad infinitum through all these books. But when you go back into the Hebrew and the Arabic, and again, it's complicated because you've got different pharaohs, and there's been this switch between the Aramaic and the Arabic. And so there are these words between the Aramaic and the Arabic. And the Egyptian Arabic is very closely related to the Aramaic. So it's not very easy. And in terms of different periods, you may have them writing Arabic or Aramaic. Again, this has to be carefully and very closely. But again, it shouldn't be that difficult to do that if you're looking at the pictograms and then reconstructing what the images and the pictures actually mean, particularly if you have a level of knowledge in terms of occult symbolism.
And let me ask you this, Pierre, and if you look into, let's say, for instance, the Tamil South Indian culture all the way up to North Indian, then you go to Japan and you see, of course, the affinity for the serpent, but you also see it more like it's their parent or it's their mother, almost as if they were even there with them. What's happening? Like, what happened in South India, all these temples and these different chimeric kind of characters that seem to be even interloping directly with the species in the physical reality, or possibly in the dream reality? Who knows the difference?
Well,
But
both,
what
yeah.
is actually happening here with this language like Tamil? And I think Sanskrit is rather new from what somebody was saying to me.
Right.
But are these people more direct descendants, or if you may, or were actually engaged directly with these forms as far as them coming down and being worshipped? Was there something like this
Well, okay,
going on? Or
where you've got the Naga, which are the serpent deities. If I
right?
remember correctly, Naga is related to Nagna, which is,
Yes, Nagas and Nagus
yeah,
and
and it means
Nagusi.
naked. In English, you'd get snake and naked. It's the same wordplay as in the Sanskrit. Um, yeah, so you have this seraphic tradition. As I said before, in the Indian tradition, you would also have the monkey god. Again, within the Buddhist tradition, monkey god stole the features of immortality. It's the same story as Prometheus. You know, how audacious human beings want to reach, and they want to live eternally like the gods. Well, they don't live eternally, but they have very long lives. And this is a knowledge which was stolen by the monkey god, which is a symbol of the humanist tradition again, and this antagonism between the serpent and the humanist tradition. So the Sanskrit language is interesting because obviously within the Greek, the old Mycenaean alphabet, which is the Linear B script, is based upon the Sanskrit alphabet, Kaki, Ko. And again, so yeah, that's in itself. And the Japanese alphabet is based upon the Sanskrit alphabet as well. And this is what makes Japanese symbolism very, very interesting, because you've got the split within the language. You've got the Sino characters, the Chinese characters, which are these ideograms, and then they've got three alphabets. They've got katakana, hiragana, and kanji. And so they have this Sanskrit alphabet, which is juxtaposed with the Chinese alphabet. And again, a lot of the Japanese etymologies relate to the languages. So the Japanese language is said not to be related to any known language. But when you begin to break it down, it's really a composite of the Chinese and Indo-European languages. But there are many comparisons with, let's say, so for example, I'm trying to remember now, I think in Sabaru, I think, is the Pleiades in Sabah.
Yes, Subaru. Yeah, Subaru.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's in
Okay.
Arabic. It's related to the number 7, and and again, this is
Okay.
going back to the priestly tradition.
So that basically answers also, and there were some questions here that I see were actually covered. One of those, how did the ancient languages such as the Tamil and the Medu Neter and the hieratic and Demotic script connect with this? And we kind of just talked about that. Also, it's there's another question here. If we can never know who we are in English alone, what template would be best to use, and what about possibility of creating our own language? And I'll just again paraphrase what was spoken earlier about that, you know, you have the dreams, you have the ability to work with empathy and to really work with your breathing, and then also to allow this to gnostically come to you as far as what needs to be done. And I can say in my 10-year experience that a lot of the knowledge in which I receive, it builds on itself. And that's one of the most interesting things, that it seems that language in itself is some type of tower that once you have the right parts to it, it seems to almost even unlock the DNA. What would you say about that also, Peter, in relation to, like, if we did discover whatever secret was behind there with Medu Neter?
Well, if you think about understanding, you're standing under someone, and knowledge is a ledge in terms of that. There's initiation in which there are layers or levels of knowledge. But the terminology disciple, one who follows, is coming from disciperati, the deceiver. A disciple is one who is deceived, and he has to go through a level of deception before he sees the truth. And so, as we mentioned before, the highest form of initiation is self-initiation. initial, it's coming from oneself. So you have to be responsible for your own learning and your own spiritual development. In terms of controlling language, I think we're seeing this already, in which there's an attempt to actually negate gender. So we're seeing this in terms of the transsexual community, who are attempting to negate gender distinctions. Now, of course, we can argue that gender is another part of how we differentiate and how we distinguish, and this separates us from male and female and from the world. But also, when we look at gender, it is what makes us human. So I'm afraid that if we get rid of gender distinctions, we're going to lose a part of us, which is our human part. And I think so. This is something that we need to be very careful about. And I think at the Chinese, ideologically, with the communist revolution, the first thing they did was they got rid of gender distinctions. They started to dress men and women alike, and started removing this idea of gender. And then that led to slaughter and genocide. And I think that, again, that was dehumanization. So,
and let me ask you this, Pierre, because I definitely feel like that becomes the luminous agenda, and there's a overall desensitization and a lack of awareness of self that continuously is pushed out in different tactics and traits.
Well, these beings are also androgynous, and also when you're dealing with a technological society as well, with AI. So there's the composite of both these beings, which are androgynous. So there would be, by negating gender, we're becoming close. We're not forming the same type of distinctions that we would necessarily with the seraphim. We're becoming more like them. And again, with AI as well, that, on a computer, you don't obviously always know whether there's a male or a female. So I think that there are a number of different competing agendas as to why that they would want to condition the human race to start thinking beyond gender. Now, obviously, some people might say that that is a good or a better idea in terms of distinction. So we're not making these types of gendered stereotypes. But I just wonder whether we would lose an intrinsic part of what it means to be human. So
absolutely. And I think that everything is kind of loaded when you're dealing with power. Like either way, the decision could be better or worse. Let me ask you this. So in your assessment now, because it's 2019, this seems like an ever evolving story. Some people think that this is like, it's always been like this, but sometimes there's changes. They make decisions. They may offer a treaty and then had pulled the treaty. The treaty may expire. So there's a lot going on back there. Who is now, let's say in the serpent biting off the heads and one rearing itself up, whatever, who is really the head honcho, or where is the seat of power? Is it scattered, or is there a real head to all of this?
Right. The movement is towards synthesis, the synthesis of the dialectic, and it's been alluded to throughout centuries. So as I said before, the dialectic is composed of the seraphic component, which is the thesis, and then you've got the antithesis, which is the human component, and then the coming together, which would be the synthesis. So the removal of gender in this respect would be seen to be a part of the synthesis, as would be the removal of ideology, the removal of religion is all a part of the synthesis, which is getting us ready for the next level within, I won't use the word human, dubious about where we're moving towards, because I think human beings need to, they have to ascertain whether they have their own autonomy, and this is important. This has never really been put to us before, and every time that human beings have attempted autonomy, it's always resulted in a bloodbath. So this is where we need, rather than changing the language, we need to be talking about the occult tradition. Fine, once we have all this knowledge on the table, and we want, if we vote upon it or discuss it and say this is a good thing for human beings to remove gender, then perhaps that is fine. That is an argument. But I would say that we can't make these type of decisions without being privy to the occult tradition. And behind this, there is this ideology. It's very strongly ideological. And so the ideology is the move towards the synthesis, the breaking down of national barriers, the breaking down of ideology, of culture, of race, the synthesis of language, of the one world government, which is headed under the I, Dracos, which is an I is a symbol of Dracon, which is the watcher or the seraphim, Theos a god, Theos a watcher, the seraphim, Sophia for watcher, Seraph a serpent. So this is the shining eye of illumination, which is symbolized as Sirius. These beings which have planted humanity on the earth, panspermia, the second creation.
You know what actually comes to mind also, and what you're saying is that there's going to be a window of opportunity. It seems like that some of the things that you mentioned are actually necessary to even get into higher states of consciousness. But it's almost like if you're dealing with that in a physical aspect too long, you almost desensitize yourself to the awareness of who you are. So it's almost like something that's sliding like this and one's coming like this, and you're looking for that perfect point to make the leap. But if you in
Yeah, well, there's a connection. There's a connection between nous, the mind, and pneuma, the spirit. Now, I mean, I think I spend too much of my time in my mind. There's a part of me which just say, you know what, I'd like to forget all of this and just like focus on the spiritual side and just spend time. I mean, I practice Tai Chi. I'd like to spend more time just doing Tai Chi and meditating. But I also think that this is very important in terms of disseminating this information. And I have a lot of information because I've been studying it like yourself for decades. So, and I've written a lot. And so I really want to try and publish a lot of these books and information just to try and put this perspective out. This is a hidden perspective. This idea that there's a humanist tradition which is identified with human angels, and then there's a seraphic component which is non-human angels, which is the thesis and the antithesis, which then will be synthesized. The Christians call this as the kingdom of God, which is the apocalypse, apocalyptin, which is to unveil. Unveiling is disclosure, basically. To disclose others, allos, which is the others, allos genes, which are the aliens. This is what the disclosure is about.
Now, it's interesting that you even mentioned in itself the synthesis, because I believe that even the cat, just the cat itself, not lions, but that the cat is actually a genetic hybrid between a snake and, let's say, a lion.
Yeah.
And so themselves, they kind of represent, because they have the concave eyes. The reason for this is that their eyes are actually different.
Eyes, yeah.
Yeah.
And the tail of the cat is often represented as a serpent within symbolism.
Right.
And you're seeing this also with the chimera as well. The chimera, as I'm trying to remember, you've got the lion, the lion's body, and then you've got the goat head, and then you've got the serpent. So you've got the lion would be Orion, the goat is the goat chimera. I'm trying to think. It's essentially it's the Pleiades. Chimera is related to the etymology of goat and the Pleiades, which is also related to the etymology of tent as well. So you've got the chimera, and then you've got the lion, which is Orion, and you've got the serpent, which is Sirius. So you've got, again, the Anthropos, or the tripartite Illuminati, the three orders of the Illuminati, which are the constellations, Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades. But
so this is like a alchemy of the souls, then, in a certain sense. They're taking different kinds of...
The chimera is alchemy, and one way of representing the conjoining of bloodlines is through welding. So it is used to represent the conjoining of these bloodlines, which, as we said, could also be represented as being grafted. So the tree is very important in terms of that symbolism. The grafting of a man to a tree. I think we've heard of that before in the Christian mysteries. And then we've also got, and then we've got the stitching of bloodlines as well. This idea of bloodlines being stitched together as well.
Okay, Peter, we're almost ending the end here, just in case you want to know where the hard stop is. So it sounds like that hybridization, and because obviously that doesn't always go well either. And I think that there's a lot of history that shows that, hey, two beings that get mixed. And also I wanted to address, this is something that me and a friend were talking about the other day, and we've had this come up over the years. And it's just that when you use certain substances, let's say like even ayahuasca, which actually has the eye on the front of it, DMT, et cetera, when your third eye opens and you look directly at a human being, you actually can still see many of the animalistic traits there. So it's almost like, well, what you feel is that this is the real one, and the one we're existing in is the fake one. So without a third eye, you can't actually even see the animal forms that exist on a person. And in this reality, it's like we all look like human beings, but really there's other things that are going on there.
Okay, let's go. Yeah, that's very true. What's happening when you are taking an hallucinogen is that you're dipping into the imaginal realm. The imaginal realm is the spiritual realm. This is the realm of ideas. This is the implicated order. So essentially, it's very similar to, because you enter into the imaginal realm, which is the realm of ideas, and then you get expelled out into the particular realm, or particularized as a life form or a sentient being. An anthropos in our case, a human being. So yeah, and you can be picking up, I think, on different timelines and different lives as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
I
But
know.
that definitely solidifies some stuff too, because, you know, all this conversation is kind of steered around certain parts of our awareness, and it's really speaking to that there's another mode of being that we're often not familiar with because we forget. And it has a lot to do with what's going on, not only in the dream world, but the mechanics of how that works. And that there's a technology, if you may, or an advancement that occurs with these particular beings where they're still able to work with the quantum field, while we have seemed to not be aware of our ability to do that, which is locking us into a specific spectrum, except for when we're sleeping.
Remember, these for that they're interested in emergent systems, and so they're monitoring everything. They can monitor what an ant is thinking, and therefore, when a human being gets to a certain level, then they're interested. And so, for example, I had a friend, and he got one of the ice marks in the country on maths, and suddenly he started talking to angels. He had no. But again, this is because they were interested, because his mind was not working like other people's minds, and so they paid attention. And again, when you're looking at the tradition as well, so for example, Majnun in Arabic means to be mad. It literally, Jana, which is in this Majnun, would be to conceal the intellect, which is madness, which is related to the jinn. But the same etymology, it's polyglottal. You find it with dementia and daemon. Again, this idea that once the physical mind begins to break down, then this other reality begins to bleed through. And I think that this is actually very interesting, because when people who start suffering dementia, they don't have this idea of time. They're suddenly talking to people who have died. And it's like, the profound question is, are they actually interacting with a different time zone or a different level of reality? I actually think that they are. And I think that in itself is a very profound realization. And again, in terms of how you deal with schizophrenia as well, when people can actually speak to different entities. And I think that this is an important question within, let's say, mental health, is not so much, oh my gosh, this person's hearing voices, because 1 in 4 people will hear voices at some point in their lives. What's important is, what are the voices saying? Are they positive? So, for example, Gustav Jung, he we'd speak to called Philemon. I think it means affectionate in the Greek, but his angel guardian was called Philemon, and he said that Philemon taught him everything that he didn't know about the spirit, the mind, and everything. Now, Jung was an incredible thinker, but this is not only just Jung. We've got Socrates as well. He had an Agatha daemon, a daemon who taught him many things as well, and he was a great thinker as well. So these great thinkers are often in communication with this otherness, with this something else. And so it's not necessarily a fact of trying to dampen the voices down, because if we'd have dampened the voice of Jung, then we wouldn't have psychoanalytical theory. But the psychoanalytical theory is based upon the dialectic, or the dialogue. And this is the dialogue between men and angels. And it is this parallel society. And as I said before, Richard Dolan talks about the breakaway civilization, but it's not really the breakaway civilization. It's the this parallel society is ancient. It goes back thousands of years. Plutarch himself, in his parallel lives, when he was writing about the different people throughout history in his parallel lives, he was really talking about the parallel society, the society between men and angels. And again, in the Roman talks about the rational and the irrational mind, which is the human and this non-human mind, which again is feeding into this idea of the Karen and the whisperer, this idea that sometimes our own ideas are not necessarily our ideas. And I think that this is very interesting when you're dealing with artificial intelligence. So, for example, if you had entities which are interested in monitoring human beings, and they're also perhaps interested in interacting with human beings, would they use certain types of remote technologies to interact with the human mind, which may actually be artificial and not actually, shall we say, demonic, but coming from this demonic tradition? And I think that in itself is another interesting question.
I think that honestly, you know, we're even being diplomatic when we're saying it might be. I know that what we've uncovered even here today is exactly what's going on, because it comes through Gnostics. It comes through, you know, just living a life and then accelerating spiritually, and then seeing as you're opening up your consciousness, not to just serve something, but to understand what's happening. Then you get all of this knowledge in a different way. I actually haven't seen anything that you said here today that I disagree with at all. Also, for those that have asked other questions, I've actually chose not to answer or ask some of these questions, only because they're almost like you can derive your own conclusion from even what was said already to actually answer these questions. So I won't speak directly to some of the other stuff like Nibiru and the ETs and all that, because this is beyond that. And also you do have Pierre's work if you do want to check out just more and get the entire body of knowledge, because he addresses all those things very directly. But I think what we're here today with, and, you know, just in wrapping this up and coming to a conclusion, is a strict awareness of the reality and the parallel realities, how they function, the other entities that are also involved in this co-creative experience with us and their agenda. I often say that they have a tendency to be more serious about this literally than we are at times, as far as how much we need to even not just study, but also engage ourselves to find our way out of this experience. I always have this thing that I say, if my eyes close, yours don't. So that still makes it my responsibility to actually figure my way through this, whatever my position is with all of these beings. But I can definitely say that they are there. And I can say for sure that when you do come into a certain level of awareness or enlightenment or a Therian stage, that you even give off more energy, you actually open up a different field within itself. And I like how we spoke towards these kind of things today.
Well, the Arabs themselves say that once you begin to study the jinn, that they actually start taking an interest in you. And it's the same with the fairies as well. So people would use euphemistic words so that they would not refer to the fairies, because again, once you start thinking about the fairies, this intelligence is interactive. It starts paying attention. So
that's funny. Is that where the evil eye thing comes from at times too? Is that all related, that people wanted to try to keep these beings from even knowing that they are around and they exist?
Well, the evil eye is etymological. So, for example, Ra in the Semitic languages is coming from the verb to see, but Ra means evil. So sight is related to that which is evil. So to see something is connected fundamentally to that which is bad. I mean, Yahweh himself is referred to as Yahweh Yira. Yahweh will see. Now, Yira is coming from the etymology of Ir, which is a watcher, which would put Yahweh Yira as an Irin. Now, the Irin are described as the watchers are the shining ones, but in the Testament of Amram, the Irin were described as having the face of a viper. So again, this is very interesting, but again, the connection of Ra, which is this watcher, is connected to the growling doggo. You know, it's growling. So this idea of the barker is very important. So Ra, when he rises in
the bark or the boat, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because just to speak into that, you know, so to put maximum clarity, because I guess we're talking about a good and a bad. And so a yin and a yang, just like you said, all the words, they have to counterbalance themselves. They actually say that where we should be really looking through is actually in the back of our eye. And that if you even read the scriptures, you find that what is being mentioned about, it's even the cornucopic, the field of the eye and the hexagons and stuff like that, that you actually see in the front of the eye. So basically what it says is that when you're looking through the front of your eyes, like how we normally see, we're actually seeing in a very divisive way, in a way that is not correct to what what we are, which in a sense could be, let's say, bad, evil, etc. And to turn your eye back in is the proper way to actually begin to come into that understanding or that awareness of, even on the back of the head, there seems to be a Jesus on the cross, in the what you call the superior brachium, an actual entity sitting there, but everything being back here. So it's almost like everything, even in these occult traditions, are like upside down. We call it the crisscross, where literally the two sides of your brain is like crossed because the son becomes a male, and then all this happens. So is there a lot of, in this tense, this confusion that goes on in the language, where if you don't know the codes, you kind of get lost?
Well, again, you're dealing here with the Gnostic tradition, and I think that this is very important, because obviously the third eye is sometimes represented as shining, which again is going back to the seraphim and this idea of being able to communicate with the jinn. So this again is a Gnostic tradition, and I think, you see, the thing is that when you begin to talk about this, people tend to view symbols as just being one-dimensional, that a symbol has one meaning, but in actual, a symbol compacts multiple meanings. It's polymorphic, and it's really, I look at symbols as being encyclopedic. So there's a fantastic amount of information which is packed into a symbol. So you have, for example, the Gnostic component. So for example, if you're looking at the basic levels of initiation, let's say you were looking at the Bible. So you have the literal meaning of the Bible. That's the first level. And then everything gets turned on its head then. Oh no, it's not literal. It's actually, it's astrotheological. The miracles are all astrotheological. And then you come to the next level, and it's no, actually, it's all literal. The gods really do exist. Didn't we tell you about that? So there are different levels, and you're coming back. So you're coming back to the beginning. So you literally coming back to literal belief. So you go from a literal belief in God to scientific understanding and deconstruction of what the scriptures means, and the symbolism back to that the gods actually exist, which is at the highest level, where you would communicate with the gods, where you would interact and meet with the gods at the highest. So
absolutely, it's incredible, because all of this also is a part of our consciousness. And I like what you said, just in closing down here, also to maintain the balance, because we believe a lot in just balancing out the field, which has to be done at every point. That what is revealed is that every time you see this one symbol, you have its exact opposite that has to kind of go with it, just like male has to go with female. And we need to always watch for this.
Yeah, this is duplex symbolism, and this is where symbolism really gets very complicated, because the meaning in the symbol is often locked to the symbol, but it's context dependent. And so we talked about the lunar priesthood being represented by the lion. So lion and lunar are related etymologically, but again, the lion can also be represented as a solar lion. And so this relationship with the lion is not, it's not fixed. And this is important to emphasize, it's context dependent. So the lion can represent itself as the lunar priesthood or the nocturnal priesthood, or it can also denote the solar priesthood. But as we said before, the solar symbol is really a symbol of Sirius. So for example, Sira, which is Sirius, you've got Sir, which is a secret, and Ra, which is the secret or the mystery of Ra, which is Sirius. But again, you've got the seraphim. Now, Sirius, Sira, is in the Arabic, which is a spark. So Sirius is the sparkling one. And the sparkling one is the one who gives birth to the seraphim, Serapha, which is fire, which are the seraphim, which are these non-human angels, which, as we said before, are the jinn. The jinn are born of fire, not in a literal sense. The smokeless fire is the star Sirius. So it's denoting this idea that the jinn originate from Sirius. And again,
and let me ask you this, Pierre, like, so because when you see, let's say, Apple, they have Siri, then they have the bitten apple, they have all of this symbolism around this. Is this because they work with them, or because they're trying to emulate them?
Yeah, I actually think, I suspect with Alexei and Siri, you've got the compartmentalization of the humanist and the seraphic tradition again, this compartmentalization of knowledge. They're obsessed about symbolism. So, so yeah, there is this compartmentalization of knowledge. So Sir would relate to Sirius, Sira, which is Sirius, Sir, which is a secret. Again, when one is knighted, you become a Sir, and Sir is implicit of a secret pertaining to Sira, which is Sirius.
Right. And then, of course, SUR, I think in Spanish is snake. So, and is this because, are they being influenced? Are they copying? Because, you know, there's always those that they may find the artifacts and like, I'm just going to associate myself with something
I don't
powerful
think,
and
no, I
ancient.
think,
Or
it's much more fundamental than this. Masters set up the world as it is, and they created the institutions. But then, and this is my opinion, that they created the hardware and then they let the software run itself, because they're very interested in terms of we're ingenious, and they're interested in these emergent systems. And this is what they're doing. They're taking all these clever ideas that humans have, and they may be like, damn, this is a good concrete, we could use this, and they take that. So you don't have to necessarily be at a high level of evolution to come up with a very clever idea. And this
you
is
know what? Yeah. I want to make sure we close this conversation with speaking to that, because you were talking about that, about how basically, and I even thought about this today, that let's say every brain is a processor, and if you got 1,000 processors there, you just, as neural networks, let them start to figure out something, maybe things that you wouldn't even be able to figure out, they're able to figure out, and then you're just kind of watching the whole thing and like, okay, they're coming up with some stuff.
And you imagine, well, again, and you can effectuate this through war, through finances, through dropping the stock market. But again, if you can piggyback off 1 million brains and you can read what they're actually thinking, then you can process this information. And this information then can be looped back into the system. And this is what they're doing. They're obsessed about knowledge. Knowledge is the currency within the universe. And this is what they're doing, mining. So they're interested in human technology. They're not necessarily interested in directing it, because that would defy the whole objective. They're interested in what human beings come up with and then using that against us, so that they can remain the top dog. As cynical as that sounds,
so they keep going. Yeah.
Well, the aliens are here and love and light, but I don't see that. 3/4 of the planet is starving. And I think that what they're doing is they're pushing these emergent systems. By creating conflict, you can actually accentuate these emergent systems. You can accelerate learning through creating famine, through creating war. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to accelerate learning. I think it's very unethical, but it's practical in terms of that they get results from it. And they've been doing this for
I mean, because that's even how they bring AI online. They bring it online through a chaos event, because they say basically that when they're trying to teach this AI how to understand how things react, they need a real scenario, because most people are pretending, most people are curating. So they have to cause an event, and then the AI picks in and it sees the desperation. It reads all the telephone calls and people running over each other, and it gathers from that. This is what real humans are like. And then that becomes the floor of the strong AI, so that it's able to go on, versus if it just had illusionary experiences that were all curated from Instagram, it wouldn't be able to derive much about how we really function.
I'm going to throw this idea at you, okay? The mind itself is electrical. It gives out electrical signals, and it's very closely, it can be effectuated through microwave radiation. So therefore, could the AI itself actually read a person's thoughts through Wi-Fi? Because we know that thoughts and ideas can be implemented through electromagnetism. This has been proven. So I would suggest that perhaps the AI itself has this ability to read people's minds, has the ability fundamentally to read people's thoughts, which again is going back to the tradition of the Karen as well, this idea that the Karen can somehow interact with the human mind, and that our own thoughts may not actually be our own thoughts. And so therefore the idea of quieting the mind is to quiet the Karen. But again, the Karen can be useful, it can impart knowledge, or it can be not so useful and send you absolutely crazy. You know, there's no kind of hard and fast rule about this, but quieting the mind is actually then accessing a deeper reality, which is this imaginal realm, which is concordant with the spiritual realm.
So it's, I guess this would be a great way to conclude this, just in speaking to that, because that gets us to the advancement of the technologies that have always being used by the priestcraft. And there was a notation made about how this vestment that's on the chest, which is known as the ephod, is now our modern day iPod. And it's because what this vestment was used to do is that the person that was coming to confess to the priest, which was a demand, like you had to confess, would touch the vest. And through these crystals, the priest would become aware of, so notice the go-between though, but become aware of what the person had done. And now when you look at the iPod or the iPad, it's kind of the same thing. It's got these buttons that you rub on or you touch. And through that, you reveal to the priestcraft, which is back there behind all these technologies, things that you wouldn't even reveal to the people that are closest to you. And even beyond that, that on many of these devices like cell phones, there's this barometric meters and infrared meters and meters galore. And so what you're saying is that this is possibly the technology that is used to feel through the field for AI as a way in order to actually gain more awareness of what's going on around us. And again, I don't want to produce like a fear factor here. I don't think this is something that you can actually run from, but that you got to stand up to. But I think that knowledge is half of the battle, as they say on G.I. Joe, and they were fighting Cobra. And in this, that just being aware of all of this starts pushing you into your own future states, as you were saying, where you have a probable reality that didn't turn out into some dismal fallout, but you actually utilize the knowledge to, in yourself, sail across this cosmic ocean and not get shipwrecked, right?
Well, going back to the ephod, with the 12 stones of the 12 tribes of Israel, the cherubim themselves, they are represented with amber. So you've got this etymological play on cherub, karaba, and karub, which is electricity. Amber is an electrostatic stone, and so is therefore used to represent the cherubim. And again, the etymology of electricity is coming from Electra, which is the goddess from the Pleiades. So this is going back to the cherubic tradition. So again, they understood that the electrostatic charges were very important in terms of accessing the quantum field, the intelligence field. This imaginal realm, which controls everything. It's the ulterior realm which penetrates and interpenetrates everything. It's the force which creates everything. The observer and the observed. There's really no such distinction, but these distinctions are artificial. And through forgetfulness, we forget this and we get tied into the illusion. And the illusion is a good illusion, and for many, it's a fun and an interesting illusion. But nevertheless, it isn't an illusion. But it is possible to actually control it in a way which could be beneficial, not only for oneself, but also for wider communities as well of individuals and people who are also participating within the illusion. So
it's interesting then that the electricity, and I think there may be some lines open, but the electricity plays like this continuous role in even how the human body and the fields of the human body, because here's obviously another image of these ultra large Dorje rods, which are known that in the tradition, if you grab these properly, but obviously this is held by a rather large being if this is a functional one, but that you could send this energy or channel the energy that is actually a part of the human body into what is just a simple coil. And in that you would get lots of opportunities. It's almost like your consciousness itself was more of the software and the hardware, but this was more of the conduit or the directing tool to send it out into different places. And obviously the llamas and things they're still holding objects today.
Yeah. And again, this feeds into the irrational mind or the subconscious mind, which is the linchpin of psychoanalytical theory. So it's not necessarily what is going on the surface of the mind. You know, you can be love and light on the surface, but what is going off underneath at this deeper level. So there is this connection between new, which is the spirit, and it's this interconnection which is really important in terms of how you manifest reality, which is this illusion.
Man. Wow, Peter, excuse me, I just wanted to say, thank you so much for taking the time and the opportunity to come in and speak with us today. Obviously, I would love for us to get on. We got a show definitely that we want to get going on in the future. I feel like we have some stuff to really deliver, and we can really connect a lot of this for humanity, especially with what's going on. I was trying to pull up some picture or a brief image of some stuff that came out from not too long ago. I think 300 or 400 years. Like I'm not sure how fast a reality can be reset. But here's one picture here, and it just shows that this electromagnetism was being used as a way. And I have several of these images, and they all appear to be very authentic. And I'm gonna put that up here now, and I'll blow that up and make sure that everybody can see that on my side. Let's see here. Let me push this over. There we go. And then let me move this out of the way. So there's several of these images, and they're way more detailed. Like this is actually the least detailed image, and it basically just shows the construction. Actually, here's another one, and even the guy's got his hand in the coat, like the hidden hand. And where this is all starting to come from is this Tartarian knowledge, which is basically the idea that there was an entire civilization out in the area that's now what we call Russia, called Tartaria, and they had actually reached a rather high state of advancement in using especially electronics, and that actually there was no oil and combustion, that they were actually using these electrical energies.
Have you, back to the other one, just move the other one back. I want to have a look at that. That's the one. No, not that one there. Yeah. Have you noticed the signifier there?
Yes, the hand in the coat.
The hidden hand.
The hidden hand.
Now, the hidden hand in this respect is Yad al-Jazza, which is the hand of the giant, which is in Orion. So it's the star constellation Orion. So this is the knowledge of the Gibberim, or the giants. Now, Sir Isaac Newton himself alluded to this knowledge. He said, I have stood on the shoulders of giants. Now, at one level, it's referring to Eton, because the Anglo-Saxon noun Eton means a giant, but the Eton is another word for the Nephilim. So it's this knowledge which goes back to Nephilia, which is Orion. And as we said before, when you begin to break down the holographic construct, then not only can you time travel, but you can then go into the imaginal realm, this which Plato talks about. And this is what you're actually seeing here. And can you see the hand as well? Again, the hand on the left picture again is another symbol of the hidden hand. So this is knowledge of electromagnetism, which is connected to the spiritual world. And so I think that's very fun. I've never seen those photographs before, and I think that's absolutely
I'll send them over to you, so that way you can do your own thorough examination, because I feel like also in many of these images you actually see other symbolism that is very telltale.
And you've got the skull as well, haven't you? So
it's almost like a reanimation process.
Yeah. And again, he's got his hand hidden
in his coat, and he's got a little wand down there. And CGI, I mean, Photoshop only gets you so far, so this ain't Photoshop. We be in Photoshop all day.
I think that these are genuine photographs. They look like genuine. He's got his hat as well, which is again part of this secret society network. If you look at the jar as well, because the jar within symbolism.
Oh yeah, the pot, right, with the gin in there, maybe.
Yeah. Pandora's box, which was a type of urn, which was for burying the dead. So when she opens the urn, she releases the spirits. And so again, this is a cytological symbol of the Ophanim wheels, because the Ophanim wheels, the Ruach Elohim, are the high spirits, but they are physical or particular. And again, let's have a look at this. Yes, and everything is based upon this idea of magnetism, isn't it? You've got
and that's right. And as being a person who also works with electronics and things, like from an engineering level, everything down here looks pretty much like what would be needed to accomplish this. So it's not like you just see again photoshopped in certain pieces that it's like that's not functional. This would be functional. Transistor tubes, electricity, and then a reanimation, as if, like you were saying before, that if there's all these realms that are existing simultaneously, this is a way to actually tap into a person and bring them, like a TV, like what we would want TV to be now. Like, let me talk to grandma 50 years ago, or somebody that's dead.
I mean, on the Fringe, they talked about this, didn't they, in terms of seeing different realities on the screen. But if you look at the photograph here on the screen, we're seeing these coils, and these coils are representative of the aeon. The aeon is the age. So within Gnostic idea, the emanation of universal forms or the implicated order into the particular realm, which is physical reality. So again, we're looking here at something which is very symbolic with the curtain as well, which is the veil and the revealing of the spiritual, the crossover between the spiritual or the imaginal realms and the physical realms. And this is why ghosts again.
And you know, the other thing, Pierre, I would like to, you know, just bring into this, and we're almost done here, but
look
how
at the
there's a
circle
lot.
and the wheel as well. Look, so you've got the opening wheel and the circle and the wheel are interchangeable. So this
Yes.
idea of this knowledge which is connected to the opening, which again are the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits.
You know,
So yes,
Pierre, I have one of these books from ancient Aleppo, like I guess it's the Mystic Order of the Shrines. It's one of their books. And the only thing that I wanted to notate out of this book is just how many men are actually in this book. Is it way more people in secret societies than the common concept? Because it seems like this book is almost 80 years old and it's full of men. They own the railroad companies, they own the power companies, and it just goes on and on and on and on. How many people are in these societies, would you say?
I don't know. I don't know, because I'm not a part of the circle of knowledge.
Right.
And I'm not, I wouldn't ever compromise myself in that way. So I really
Yes.
don't know. But from what we can ascertain, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. And we see
Right.
that with corporate logos. We see that within the media. It's absolutely everywhere. So if you want to be anyone or anybody, you have to be a part of these organizations often. Most,
Right.
you know,
That was their old paradigm, right? They've been holding a monopoly on this technology, and it even seems like, again, like these are old pictures, like these are Quakers in a certain sense. So it's not necessarily an advanced technology; it's a certain stage of awareness, right?
Well, Facebook, the Hebrew word panim, which is face, is where you get the etymology of pana, which is to turn, and the word ophan, which is a wheel. So when God is talking to Moses, the term is used face, but the word etymology is related to turn, which is related to a wheel. So the face of God is actually a wheel.
Wow, that's incredible, because even when I came into that awareness of the words, when I wrote the book, The Code of the Matrix, it basically was explained to me that it was turning wheels in my mind, that my mind had previously a broken wheel because of the language and not being able to connect it. And then now with this additional insight of how all the words were similar, that I was turning a complete wheel. And through that, I actually answer anything based on more of an algorithm than the actual awareness of knowledge. So it's like a sequence rather than data compiling. And I think that's also the future of future of storage of data, is more of storing it in sequences that can be unpacked rather than large bits and bytes that actually amount to large amounts of data. It just is just algorithms.
Yeah.
So, wow.
I think that's very interesting. Yeah. And again, I think we'll move away from this kind of like binary system, and probably will produce at least this third element, this potentiality, where it's neither one nor the other. It's so again,
somehow a synthesis, right?
This quantum computers.
Okay, I guess somebody may have took over the screen. Okay, so what we're going to do is that I will say, you know, this has been amazing for me, you know, as far as being able to connect in. I had the initial sound issues. I was a little bit concerned about not even being able to get in and ask some questions and even mediate the conversation from a level of getting just your awareness out on the table, because I feel like you have so much information. I mean, it's in the volumes of your book. So getting you to speak towards specific things is also necessary. And so I look forward to our next build where we can do that. Maybe we go on YouTube Live and give some love out there. I'll also, you know, I'll talk to you about this, but maybe with your permission, I'd love to get this on the YouTube so people can get their minds blown for a minute, but then seed it back into their consciousness about, you know, hey, this is big time. Like either you're going to come up to the plate here, or somebody else is going to.
You see, this is the thing as well, and I think this is particularly in terms of the scaphological tradition, this tradition of angelic vessels, which is this classified tradition, classis and naval fleet. It's been hidden from humanity for a long time. And in terms of deconstructing religion, relegatum or a vessel, worship, which ship is a boat, it's really an important component. And it underscores everything. So you cannot understand the religious tradition without understanding the scaphological tradition. But unfortunately, it's a classified tradition. It's a hidden tradition. The naval tradition is a classified tradition, but it's found in all cultures. It's universal. And so the concept of the angelic sailor, and I know kind of it was bandied about for many years, like with Van Diniken, but it was never tangible. His ideas were philosophically interesting, but that was it. But this,
Yes.
we can be scientific about this, and this is important because academia is scoffing at this, but yet they don't understand the tradition of the angelic sailor, and it's so integral to decoding the ancient scriptures. It's integral to understanding everything, the origin on this planet and everything. And so there has been this systematic attempt to undermine this within academia. I don't actually think that the Illuminati are too bothered what the general man thinks. They're more bothered about what the academics thinks. They're more bothered about the people who push the buttons, the administrators, the people who control and steer ideology. They're the ones who are interested in. And therefore, this is why there has been the systematic attempt to undermine this subject, which is a very serious subject and should be taken seriously within academia. And so I think programs like this is really helping to hopefully to re-educate the general population, so that when we start talking about things like ancient aliens, people are not going to begin to scoff and laugh at themselves, but take it seriously, because the tradition which goes back into the ancient world. As we said before, this idea of abduction is not a new idea. It goes back into the ancient languages, and it goes back to the scatological tradition, which is essentially going back to the tradition of flying saucers. This is no longer speculation. I have proved this within my books. Before, we just didn't know, but I have demonstrated this within my book, that the angelic sailor is linked into the ufological tradition. We now know this to be a fact, and it's pivotal to understanding everything within the religious and mythological tradition. And it's not known about. People in ufology just don't know about this.
Right.
You know,
it's almost like they're there to distract from it. Like they miss the mark completely. They take it either literal or over spiritual, but no research, no foundation. So it puts it into the quackery kind of aspect, or the conspiracy theory type of aspect of thing, which is exactly where they would want it, because it keeps you from dissecting it fully, which locks us out of the mysteries. And there it is.
Exactly. I mean, you know, my son has got more subscribers than me. You know what I mean? This is how bad it is. It's really, but yeah, this is so important to understanding everything, because it's going back into so many different traditions in terms of our knowledge base. Human beings are suffering from amnesia. We are suffering from amnesia, and we need to learn about this, because there is this occult has rewritten everything. And it's rewritten religion, it's rewritten mythology, and it's concealed behind who I describe as the disciperati, the deceivers. They are these custodians of this knowledge. They are the protectorate of this knowledge. And they know about this knowledge. Whether you're in Japan with the Utsu no Fune, which are these guarding the shrines, which are symbolic of these hollow ships, and not Utsu no Fune, which is a hollow vessel. These vessels are physical and solid. They were buried underneath the temples. And so when we talk about the nuts and bolts of ufology, and remember, look at even the wordplay, bolts as in a boat and bolts, you know, they're always telling us the obvious in terms of the symbolism, and they are obsessed with symbolism. And there is this codified discourse, this private discourse, which is found throughout the language of politics. If you're interested in politics and you're listening to the politicians, listen to the codified speech. Listen to what they're saying. What is the subtext behind what they are saying? And this is important. We need to be literate in terms of symbolism to be able to decode what the Illuminati themselves are saying. And this priesthood goes back to the Akzari, a brother of light. But as we said, the Arabic word Akzari, a brother of light, is a wordplay on Akzari, a brother of an angel. But the word Zar, an angel, is Zar, which is an alien. So we need to be going back to the traditions of the Akzari, the brothers of the light, which is going back to the Seraphim, Pythonagoras, the speaker of the serpent, or the Pythagorean tradition, which goes back to Sirius. And this is found encoded within the classical orders, within the classical symbolism, within the two orders of the Illuminati, the Harrow Society and the two pillars of Freemasonry, and is found within the tripartite Illuminati, or the three orders of the Illuminati, which is essentially this anthropos, the anthropos being this human, non-human element, and then this grafted element. And it's going back into the saucer cults and how the votive dish is represented as a flying saucer in which they worshipped ship is to venerate these angelic vessels. It goes back to the saucer. And it goes back to the dialectic, the seraphim cherubim dialectic, this partition of knowledge between non-human and human angels, this humanist tradition, and then this non-human element, where essentially we're dealing here with the angelic host, because they appear, often the angelic host appear together. So if you look at within classical carving, you'll find that the serpent chariots, the ophanim, the wheels are combined with the seraph, which is the seraphic host. And then you'll see often an angel with a sword, which would be cherub, which is a word play, and cherub, which is a sword. Again, these because they are part of the military contingent. They were representing the angels as marines, space marines in the literal sense, and these angelic sailors, the angelic mariner. It's so pivotal to understanding everything. And I've been talking about this for, I've been talking about it now for a long time, and no one's paying attention. It's like, I think that this biggest discoveries in theologies, it's massive. The scatological tradition, nobody knows about it, but it's integral to understanding everything within the religious tradition. And nobody's talking about it within ufology. I've done lectures and I've gone around talking about this, and it seems like no one is actually paying attention, but it is so integral to understanding everything. So I think you're right. We do need to talk about this. This is important.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that, just even in our first encounter, truth, you see truth. And then over the years, this has been, I know you've probably been in at least 12 years, if not longer. Well, I think that was how long it took to write your first book. So it's like you're like 20 years out, and then how many people are aware of that versus the popularized version is distinct. But now, obviously, there's a big shift happening where I feel like that all of that is happening to clear out all the muck. Okay, that didn't get it. We didn't learn anything from that. This is probably it.
this is important. It's very important. But I mean, we've been in community probably about a decade, and we've been kind of discussing ideas behind the scene on and off. So you're obviously very you're read into my work, and you understand my work more than other people, and again, you have this vast reservoir of occult knowledge, and this is why it's always so fascinating actually talking to you. It is a very technical subject, and when you're dealing with symbolism, you're not just dealing with one aspect. What type of symbolism are we talking about? Are we talking about linguistic encryption? Are we talking about mathematical encryption? Are we talking about astrological symbolism, astrotheology? These are all different components to, or different sides of the same coin, or the same thing. And so it is very layered, and we're dealing here with ancient knowledge. And as you've said before, this knowledge goes back into mathematics, sacred geometry. It's vast, it's ancient, and we are suffering from amnesia, and we need to wake up. So
yes. All right. Well, everyone, Pierre Sabak, you heard it here first. And definitely, that this is that grade A. Like I can say from this conversation, there's been a lot of demystification of so many things, but there's also been an opening up of a new level of knowledge and an awareness that will empower. Like it's personally empowered me to always stay stable when I see people going off in this other direction that they don't understand, because this body of knowledge kind of explains already what they're going into. So you're not wasting time. So there's much to gain from this. And again, we'll share the website. I'll get this up on YouTube so that way others can check it out. I feel like that we dive through a nice variety, a good taste of what is actually here to really be expunged upon. But if you want to get the full body of knowledge, definitely look at the book. Pierre, is there anything else that you wanted to say to anyone that's here today in relation to the subject? And just open that last thing up.
Okay. In terms of my book, I mean, I wrote two books, The Merge of Reality, which looks at the occult tradition of the serpent, and then Holographic Culture. I think if somebody's interested in buying a book and they're unsure which book to buy, then I would recommend A Holographic Culture, because it's really a synthesis of all of my ideas, coupled with the fact it's about 100 pages longer than The Merge of Reality. So in that respect, it's better value. But holographic culture is really a synthesis of my ideas over 15 years, actually maybe longer, but it's a synthesis of these ideas, and it really goes into the scaphological tradition, the study of angelic vessels within the religious and mythological tradition. So it looks at the ideas, for example, of the source occults, how the source occults control everything, how there is this partition of knowledge between human and non-human angels, which is the seraphim cherubim dialectic, known as the Pythagorean Euclid dialectic within classical philosophy. And so it really covers lots of different areas. It looks at all different types of symbolism, whether it's polymorphic symbolism, diptych paranomasia, which are word plays from one language into another. So it really gets into the language of symbolism, or illuminautics is what I describe. This method of deconstructing the language of the Illuminati. And so, you know, if you really want to try and understand symbolism, it's a real good pointer or a base to really begin to understand this, because I've had to invent a lot of words, because quite frankly, there aren't the words within the English language to describe what are happening within the symbolism. So I've had to procreate words from the Arabic and the Greek in order to describe what is occurring, in order to describe the artifact, which is this alien code within human language. And so I think, yeah, holographic culture will serve many of your viewers very well in terms of understanding the scaphological tradition. And the
I like that too, because when you understand etymology, you see that there are literally missing words. Like you're like, hey, there's supposed to be a word here that would just be a conjunction of these two words. And that's why anytime you say these words, they sound like words like panspermia, and these words like they ring as, because, you know, sometimes you could say a word and then it's like something's convulsed. It's like a convoluted something going on. And sometimes you say words like, wait, why doesn't that word exist? It's supposed to exist. And obviously in the hidden languages, it does exist, and it's just a part of the code being removed. So it creates a gap.
I'm also very interested in subliminal use of language and words as well. And this is used often as well.
Yeah, they say even body language is the point-to-point system of confirmation that goes on between humanity that we're often unaware of, because the way the consciousness actually sees, even when you walk in a building, some people actually shift different and sees things different, and your consciousness picks up on all this and already begins to interpret the space it's in. So lots of stuff going on the hidden languages. And I also want to say, if this is going across live, it'll be going across live air, so it may not be any links in. So I wanted to say, if you're looking for the book, it's at Pierre Sabak Books. At
Pierre Sabak.
Yeah, they can Google it, but
Google Pierre Sabak. Google
exactly.
Pierre
I'll spell it out for them. Sometimes, you know, there's some confusion. So it's PIERRESABAKBOOKS.com. And so you can check out that website, and then you'll see his works. And that's good. Let's get it on the camera. No, it's frontwards, but yeah, there it is. So you see it on the screen, you've heard it. And wow, Pierre, so thank you so much. Just sending love to the family also. You know, even the family's in this. I'm sure the wife and everybody has been just as enigmatic in this growth, right? Like we always, we want to recognize them and give honorings to them too. And thanks for even sustaining you through this purpose. I also want to say thank you to, you know, all of our ancestors, you know, in building this DNA. You know, I feel like we get our bearing on all of this, that we will have an amazing existence but it's a challenge before us now to actually do this, not only for ourselves, but also for all of humanity. So thank you for standing in the gap.
To be honest, Sevan, I see that I have a lot in common with you. We're both men of knowledge. All our lives we've been pursuing knowledge, and this is important. And so, so thank you again.
Absolutely, Pierre. I've always recognized that connection. So me and you, we run hand in hand. We've done this before. So it's just the thing of bringing humanity into this stage of awareness and what it's going to create for all of us in the future. So I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure it gets out there. I'm finally glad that we got a chance to get this in. Right. And also, we went through some very tantalizing stuff. So I'm sure there's going to be some people that check back and be like, well, I need to get the rest of this. So definitely, I look forward to our connection. Thank you so much.
And if you ever want to talk again or do this again, I'm always available. So just email me and we'll chat again sometime. And good luck with
Okay.
your project and your work as well, because I know that this is very important and you're getting a lot of important information now. So I'm really, I'm very pleased about that. I'm very glad. I'm very optimistic. I'm quietly optimistic. I do think that there is an awakening. And I think also that people are beginning to wire into the circuit as well. Their own thing, okay, yes, we do have to have a uniformity coming together, but the state can't control people if they're doing their own thing. So, if for example, if you're good on Facebook, some people put information out on Facebook. Other people are very good at writing letters. Other people are very good at talking, and so will communicate these ideas. And I think everyone has something to do. You have to find what you are good at, and then try and make your part of the world a better part of the world. And that's very important. You need to participate. You need to be an active player. And so I think that's something to think about. We need to all connect up on the circuit and do our own important integral thing, but yet be part of the circuit board. Okay.
Agreed. All right, Pierre, thank you so much. Wholeness and Balanced Vibrations. Also, Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in and being in the space. I know that this will have those degrees of separation, meaning that you'll be able to share it with others. And I'll get this video up into the archives ASAP also, so that way you can look over what was said. Again, thank you so much, Pierre Sabak.
Take care. Bye.
Wholeness.